Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a cold stone kitchen where steam curls from a clay pot and the first light of dawn barely reaches through oiled linen stretched across narrow windows. You're standing at a rough wooden table, your fingers wrapped around earthenware that radiates warmth into your palms, and the scent rising from the liquid inside is floral, grassy, and faintly sweet. This isn't just a morning drink, this is your medicine, your comfort, your defense against the chaos of medieval life. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your grandmother insisted on chamomile before bed, or why herbal teas feel like they carry some ancient, unspoken wisdom. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or what your favourite tea is, or even just that you're here, trying to find a little peace before sleep takes you. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You live in a world without pharmacies, without antibiotics, without the luxury of calling a doctor who might actually help. The year is somewhere in the 13th century, and you are a woman whose survival depends on knowledge passed down through whispers, through watching, through the careful preservation of recipes that never make it into the books men write. Your mother taught you, and her mother taught her, and somewhere far back in the mist of memory, a woman stood in a forest and first understood that certain leaves, when steeped in boiling water, could ease pain, summon sleep, or break a fever that would otherwise kill. This morning, you reach for chamomile because your youngest child coughed through the night, and you know in your bones, in the place where instinct lives, that this particular flower, dried and stored in a leather pouch since last summer, will soothe her throat and help her rest. You scoop a palmful of the tiny, daisy-like blossoms into your pot, pour over water heated on the hearth fire, and wait. The smell alone begins to work its magic, that apple-sweet fragrance that seems to soften the sharp edges of worry. Historians still argue whether medieval women understood the chemical compounds they were working with, but you don't need Latin names for the molecules that make chamomile effective. You just need it to work. And it does. Chamomile grows wild in your world, spilling across fallow fields and waste ground, and you gather it in July when the flowers are fullest, laying them on clean linen in the sun until they're crisp enough to crumble. You store them in the driest corner of your home because dampness ruins everything, turning medicine into mouldy waste. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder once wrote about chamomile's ability to cure just about anything, and while you've never read Pliny, you can't read it all. His observations have filtered down through centuries of women who noticed the same things he did. Fever, chamomile. Anxiety, keeping you awake. Chamomile. Stomach upset after suspicious meat chamomile again. There's practicality to your relationship with this plant that modern people have lost. You don't visit a store and choose between 17 brands of chamomile tea, each promising different benefits and wrapped in cardboard covered with serene imagery. You walk to the field, you harvest, you dry, you store, and when you need it, you brew it. It's that simple and that profound. The knowledge of when to pick, how much to use, how long to steep, this is your inheritance. More valuable than silver, more reliable than any promise a man might make. You pour the strained liquid into a wooden cup for your daughter, blowing across the surface to cool it, and you watch her small hands wrap around it the same way yours wrapped around your cup earlier. She drinks, makes a face at the bitterness despite the honey you've stirred in, and within an hour she's sleeping more peacefully. You won't call this a miracle because miracles are for saints and prayers, but you will call it effective. and effectiveness is its own kind of grace. The mainstream historical fact woven into your morning is this: chamomile was documented in medieval medical texts as a cure-all, appearing in herbals and treatises written by male physicians who often took credit for knowledge women had practiced for generations. The Benedictine abbess Hildegard of Bingen wrote extensively about chamomile in her 12th century medical compendium, calling it useful for virtually every ailment from headaches to digestive troubles. But here's the quirky tidbit: medieval folks believed chamomile could prevent lightning strikes if planted around your house, and some women swore that talking to the plants while harvesting them made the medicine stronger. You might laugh at that, or you might understand that ritual and intention were the only things that gave women a sense of control in a world determined to strip them of power. As morning light finally breaks through your window, turning from grey to pale gold, you return to your own cup of chamomile, now cooled enough to drink in long swallows. Your husband is already gone to the fields. Your older children are stirring, and you have bread to bake, chickens to feed, and a garden that won't tend itself. But for just this moment, you stand still, hands cupped around earthenware, breathing in steam that smells like summer meadows and ancient wisdom. The tea warms you from the inside, unknotting the small tensions in your shoulders, and you think, though you'd never say it aloud, that this might be the only magic you truly believe in. Medieval women didn't have the luxury of nervous breakdowns or self-care Sundays. They had chamomile. They had the knowledge that certain plants could be trusted when nothing else could, and they had each other, trading recipes and remedies in low voices while men debated theology and made laws that governed women's bodies but never asked women what they knew. Do you remember the last time you felt truly calm? That's what this tea is supposed to give you. And in a world of plague, childbirth, violence and uncertainty, calmness is revolutionary. The preparation of chamomile tea in your kitchen is a ritual that connects you to countless women across time and geography. You know that in the village 3 miles east, another woman is doing exactly what you're doing, steeping flowers, watching steam rise, hoping for relief. In the monastery just beyond the forest, nuns are preparing their own chamomile infusions, perhaps adding a bit of mint from their carefully tended gardens. Even in the castle on the hill, where life is supposedly easier, the lady of the manor trusts chamomile more than she trusts the travelling physician who bleeds people for every complaint. Your relationship with this plant is intimate in a way that modern people rarely experience with their medicine. You know where the best chamomile grows in the sunny patch near the mill, where the soil is poor but well drained. You know that flowers picked after rain are inferior, that they mould more easily and lose their potency. You know that the most fragrant flowers make the strongest tea, and that you should never harvest more than half of what's growing, leaving some for the bees and for next year's crop. There's an art to the drying process that your mother made look effortless but took you years to master. Spread the flowers too thick and they rot, too thin and they blow away in the wind. Dry them in direct sun and they lose their essential oils. Dry them in shade and they take too long, risking mildew. You've learned to find the balance, to check them twice daily, to turn them gently with your fingertips until they crackle with perfect dryness. This knowledge isn't written anywhere. It exists only in the doing, in the muscle memory of women's hands, in the accumulated wisdom of paying attention. When you finally sit down with your second cup of the morning, because one is never quite enough, you let your mind drift to the other teas waiting in your collection, the rosehips hanging in bunches from the rafters, the mint drying in flat baskets, the sage bundled and tied with twine. Each one serves a purpose, each one holds a promise, and together they form a pharmacopoeia more reliable than anything the apothecary in town could sell you. Not that you could afford the apothecary anyway, with his imported ingredients and his prices that assume everyone has silver to spare. Your daughter stirs in her sleep, coughs once a softer sound than before and settles again. You smile into your tea, feeling the weight of responsibility lighten just slightly. You've done what you could with what you have, and it was enough. Tomorrow you'll gather more chamomile if the weather holds. You'll check your stores and see what else needs replenishing. You'll continue the quiet work of keeping your family alive. 1 cup of tea at a time, drawing on knowledge that stretches back further than anyone can remember and will. If you teach your daughters well, stretch forward into futures you'll never see. The frost came early this year, coating the hedgerows in crystalline armour before October even finished, and you've been watching the rosehips ripen into their deepest crimson. Knowing that timing is everything, you pull your wool cloak tighter and step out into air so cold it burns your lungs, carrying a woven basket and a pair of thick leather gloves because rosehip thorns are vicious and unforgiving. The brambles twist along the edge of the common land, heavy with oval fruits that glow like drops of blood against grey November skies, and you've come to harvest them before the birds strip the bushes bare, or the really hard frost turn them to mush. Rosehips aren't beautiful in the way chamomile flowers are beautiful. They're tough, practical, studded with tiny hairs that itch if they touch your skin, and they grow on plants that seem designed to punish anyone who wants to gather them. But you desperately need them, because winter is the season of scurvy. That cruel disease that makes gums bleed and teeth loosen and turns strong people into weak shadows of themselves. Your grandmother lost 3 teeth one winter when the stored vegetables ran out and fresh food became impossible to find. And she told you, her voice whistling through the gaps in her smile, that rosehip tea was the only thing that saved her from losing more. You reach carefully past the thorns, gripping each hip between your gloved fingers and twisting gently until it comes free with a soft pop. The basket fills slowly because you're selective, choosing only the firmest fruits, the ones that haven't started to wrinkle or soften. Some women wait until after the first hard frost to gather rosehips, claiming it sweetens them, but you prefer to harvest earlier and dry them carefully, preserving that bright tartness that makes your mouth pucker and somehow feels like medicine working. Modern science would eventually discover that rosehips contain more vitamin C than oranges, 20 times more by some measurements. But you don't need that vocabulary to understand that this bitter red fruit keeps the winter sickness at bay. The mainstream historical fact that underlies your morning's work is well documented. Medieval Europeans relied heavily on rosehips as a source of nutrition during the lean winter months, and monastic herbals frequently mention their use in treating ailments we now associate with vitamin deficiency. But here's the quirky detail that would make you laugh if you knew it. Some medieval texts claimed that rosehips could cure the plague, restore virginity, and even reverse aging, which says more about medieval desperation than about rosehips' actual properties. Historians still argue whether the vitamin content of dried rosehips was significant enough to actually prevent scurvy, given how much of the vitamin C degrades during drying. But you're living proof that something in these fruits works, even if no one can explain exactly why. Your fingers are already stiffening from the cold by the time your basket is half full, and you pause to blow warm breath over them, watching the vapour cloud dissipate into the morning. A robin watches you from a nearby branch, tilting its head as if offended that you're taking food it considers its own, and you almost apologise out loud before catching yourself. There's something meditative about this work, the careful reaching and plucking, the sting when a thorn catches you despite the gloves, the growing weight of the basket on your arm. You think about the women you know who refuse to gather rosehips, calling them too much trouble for too little reward, and you pity them secretly because they're missing knowledge that could save their lives. When you finally return home, fingers numb and cheeks burning from wind, you dump your harvest onto the table and begin the tedious work of preparation. Each rosehip must be topped and tailed, the dried flower remnants snipped off one end, the stem removed from the other. Then comes the really annoying part, splitting them open and scraping out the seeds and the irritating hairs that surround them. These hairs are called itching powder by children who stuff them down each other's shirts as pranks, and getting them on your hands, or worse, accidentally in your tea, will make you regret being born. So you work carefully, methodically, splitting and scraping and setting aside the cleaned flesh in a growing pile that looks insignificant compared to the heap of discarded seeds and fluff. Some women skip this step, brewing the rosehips whole and straining carefully, but you've learned that the hairs can make it through even the finest linen strainer, and the resulting throat irritation isn't worth the saved time. Your mother was a whole hip brewer, and you remember her complaining about the scratchy feeling, so you've become a meticulous cleaner, even though it means this harvest will take you the rest of the morning to process. The flesh, once cleaned, goes onto drying racks near the fire, where it will slowly dehydrate over the next few days into leathery pieces that you'll store in a clay jar sealed with wax. The taste of rosehip tea is an acquired one, aggressively tart, almost sour, with a fruity depth that's nothing like the delicate florals of chamomile. You brew it strong, using more hips than you probably should because you've convinced yourself that stronger means more effective. When you finally pour yourself a cup from this morning's pot made with last year's dried hips, since this year's aren't ready yet, the liquid glows a beautiful amber pink. And that first sip makes your whole face scrunch up involuntarily. It's like drinking concentrated autumn. All the sharpness of the season condensed into liquid form, and you add honey liberally, stirring until the tartness becomes merely assertive rather than attacking. Your children hate rosehip tea, making dramatic gagging sounds whenever you make them drink it. But you insist anyway because you've seen what winter does to people who don't have sources of well. You don't have the word vitamin, but you understand the concept of certain foods preventing certain sicknesses. By midwinter, when the cabbages stored in the root cellar are limp and brown, when the apples have either been eaten or gone bad, when fresh food is a distant memory, this tea will be one of the few things standing between your family and bleeding gums. That's not dramatic. That's just reality in a world where nutrition depends entirely on what you've managed to preserve. Do you remember what it feels like to really need something, not just want it? That's your relationship with rosehips. You need them the way you need firewood and grain, except you can't buy them at any price. You can only gather them yourself, fighting thorns and cold and birds for every single fruit. There's a satisfaction in that self-sufficiency, a pride in knowing you've secured this resource through your own knowledge and effort. The village wise woman, old Agnes, who lives in the cottage with a crooked chimney, once told you that the fairy folk protect rosehip bushes, and that's why they're so difficult to harvest. You don't believe in fairies. Exactly. But you appreciate the metaphor. Anything this valuable should require effort to obtain. The hedgerow where you gathered this morning is the same hedgerow your mother gathered from, and probably her mother before that. These particular bushes are old, their canes thick as your wrist in places, and they produce reliably year after year. You've noticed that rosehips from sunny locations are sweeter than those from shaded spots, and that bushes growing near limestone soil seem more vigorous. This is practical botany learned through observation, through paying attention season after season. And while it won't earn you any recognition from the scholars who write about plants in Latin, It's the kind of knowledge that actually keeps people alive. As you work through your pile of rosehips, fingers cramping from the repetitive motion of slicing and scraping, you let your mind wander to the other hedgerow treasures you've gathered this autumn. Blackberries came early, and you made syrup for coughs. Hawthorn berries are drying for heart tonics. Sloes are steeping in the last of the honey for winter cordials. The hedge is a pharmacy if you know how to read it, and you've spent your whole life learning that language. Some women your age can read actual words on parchment, daughters of merchants or minor nobility who had tutors, but you can read the landscape, and in terms of practical survival, your literacy might be more valuable than theirs. By afternoon, your back aches from hunching over the table, and your fingernails are stained reddish-brown from rosehip juice. The pile of cleaned flesh has grown satisfyingly large, and you estimate you've got enough here for at least 20 good strong pots of tea, maybe more if you're careful with portions. You brew yourself another cup, this time adding a bit of dried mint for complexity, and the combination is surprisingly pleasant, the mint's coolness balancing the rosehip's aggression. You make a mental note to remember this blend, maybe even teach it to your oldest daughter, who's reaching the age where she needs to start learning these things properly instead of just watching. The light is starting to fade earlier and earlier these days, winter asserting its dominance, and you know that soon the gathering season will be completely over, everything locked under snow or frozen too hard to harvest. But you've prepared. Your stores are full of dried herbs and fruits. Your knowledge is comprehensive, and your hands remember how to turn wild things into healing. The rosehips drying by your fire are more than just tea. They're insurance against the hardest months. They're the accumulated wisdom of generations. They're proof that women have been keeping themselves and their families alive with whatever grows at hand since long before anyone wrote anything down about it. The cramping starts the way it always starts, a low, grinding ache in your belly that announces itself just before dawn, pulling you from sleep with its insistent pressure. You lie still for a moment, hoping it's just your imagination. But then the second wave arrives, tightening like an iron band wrapped around your lower abdomen, and you know you're in for a difficult day. Your monthly bleeding has arrived with its usual punishment, and you have work to do regardless of how your body feels about it. So you rise carefully, light a candle from the banked coals in the hearth, and reach for the bundle of dried peppermint hanging from a nail in the darkest corner of your kitchen, mint for the womb. This is knowledge so old that no one remembers who discovered it first. Your mother used it, her mother used it, and somewhere back in the unrecorded past, a woman writhing with menstrual pain grabbed a handful of wild mint, crushed it, steeped it in hot water, and found relief. That discovery has been passed down through an unbroken chain of female experience, never written in medical texts, never credited to any physician, just quietly preserved in the practical pharmacopoeia that women maintain in their kitchens and gardens. You strip leaves from the dried stems, releasing that sharp, cooling fragrance that seems to cut through pain just by existing, and drop them into your brewing pot. The water you pour over the mint is as hot as you can make it, heated until it's just starting to bubble, because you've learned that mint needs aggressive heat to release its full potency. The smell that rises with the steam is intense, menthol sharp and almost medicinal, and you breathe it in deeply, letting it clear your head and distract from the cramping that's building toward its daily crescendo. Modern pharmacology would eventually identify the compounds responsible for mint's effectiveness, menthol, and other volatile oils that act as smooth muscle relaxants, but you don't need chemical names to understand that this plant eases the spasms racking your uterus. While the tea steeps, you press your hands against your lower belly, applying warmth and pressure in the way that sometimes helps. The pain is familiar, A monthly visitor you've learned to negotiate with rather than defeat, because defeat isn't possible. You're not sick, this is just the price of being a woman of childbearing age. But that doesn't make it any less debilitating. You've seen women doubled over in fields, unable to work through their bleeding days, and you've seen others push through with grim determination, faces pale and lips pressed tight. You fall somewhere in between, functional but suffering, and the mint tea is what makes functionality possible. The mainstream historical fact underlying your morning ritual is well-documented mint species, particularly peppermint and spearmint, appear in virtually every medieval herbal as treatments for women's complaints. The Anglo-Saxon leech books mention mint for menstrual issues, and the Trotula, a collection of medical texts focused on women's health, recommends mint preparations for uterine pain. But here's the quirky detail that medieval herbalists believed mint could supposedly control whether you conceived sons or daughters, with different preparation methods yielding different results. Historians still argue whether medieval women actually experienced the level of menstrual pain modern women report, or whether historical silence on the topic simply reflects the fact that women's suffering wasn't considered worth recording. You pour the steeped tea through a linen cloth into your favourite wooden cup, the one with the handle worn smooth by years of use, and take that first careful sip. The taste is strong, almost overwhelming, a cooling sensation that spreads across your tongue and seems to travel directly to the source of your pain. It's not instant relief, nothing offers that but within a quarter hour. The sharp edges of the cramping begin to dull, the iron band loosens slightly, and you can breathe more deeply. You drink the entire cup slowly, savouring each mouthful, and already you're planning to brew another pot to carry you through the day. Your husband stirs in the bed behind you, and you move quietly because you don't want to explain again how much this hurts. Men in your world don't understand menstruation beyond knowing it makes women temporarily unclean and unable to perform certain tasks. Some think it's God's punishment for Eve's sin, others think it's just an unfortunate natural process, but none of them have to experience the reality of bleeding for days while still cooking, cleaning, caring for children, and tending animals. So you suffer quietly, the way women are expected to suffer, and you brew your mint tea in the pre-dawn darkness like a secret ritual of survival. The mint growing in your garden, well, garden is generous. It's more of a scraggly patch behind your cottage is aggressive and unstoppable, which makes it perfect for your purposes. You planted a few runners 3 years ago, and now it's threatening to take over entirely, sending underground stems in every direction and popping up in places you never intended. Other herbs require careful tending, but mint just needs to be restrained, which is ironic considering how much you rely on it for restraining your own body's painful enthusiasms. You harvest it throughout the growing season, cutting whole stems and hanging them in bunches to dry, and you're never without a good supply. The preparation of mint tea has become so automatic that you barely think about the steps anymore. Grab a handful of dried leaves, fresh works too, but dried is more concentrated. Pour boiling water, steep for at least 5 minutes, longer if you're in serious pain. Strain, add honey if you're feeling indulgent, though the taste is pleasant enough without sweetening. Drink hot as you can stand, because cold mint tea loses something essential in the cooling. You've refined this process over years of monthly practice, adjusting quantities and steeping times until you've found the exact formula that works best for your particular body. Do you remember the last time pain dictated your entire day, shaping every decision and limiting every movement? That's menstruation in medieval times. No ibuprofen, no heating pads, no ability to call in sick and lie on a couch with a hot water bottle. You work through it or you don't eat. It's that simple. and the mint tea is what makes working through it possible. Some women in your village use other remedies, willow bark for general pain, yarrow baths, hot compresses, but you've found mint most reliable, most accessible, and most pleasant to consume multiple times per day when you're already miserable. Your daughter, now 11, will start her own bleeding soon, and you've already begun teaching her about mint. You've shown her which plants in the garden are which mint versus lemon balm versus the other leafy green things that look similar to untrained eyes. You've let her help with harvesting and drying, and you've brewed weak mint tea for her when she's had stomach aches, preparing her for the day when she'll need it for something more specific and more painful. This knowledge transfer is one of your most important responsibilities as a mother, more crucial than teaching her to spin wool or make bread, because this knowledge will serve her every month for decades. The second cup of tea goes down easier than the first, your body already responding to the initial dose, and you feel strong enough now to start the day's work. The chickens need feeding, the cow needs milking, there's bread to bake and clothes to mend and 100 other tasks that don't pause just because you're bleeding. But you're functional now. The pain reduced from unbearable to merely present, and you have the mint to thank for that. You tuck a small pouch of dried leaves into your apron pocket, planning to brew another cup at midday, and you step out into the cold morning with grim determination. The village wise woman, Agnes, once told you that mint was sacred to the goddess of the underworld in the old times before Christianity, and that women used it in rituals honouring the dark moon and the blood mysteries. You don't know if that's true or just Agnes talking nonsense like she sometimes does, but there's something appealing about the idea that this pain, this bleeding, this monthly reminder of your fertility or lack thereof was once considered sacred rather than shameful. You imagine ancient women sitting in circles, drinking mint tea and sharing their experiences, and the image comforts you even if it's completely invented. By afternoon, you've brewed your third pot of the day, and the pain has faded to a dull background ache that you can mostly ignore. The bleeding continues. Of course it will for several more days, but the worst of the cramping has passed, tamed by the mint's soothing properties. You've accomplished everything that needed accomplishing, fed everyone who needed feeding, and survived another monthly trial through a combination of plant knowledge and stubborn refusal to surrender. Tomorrow will be easier, and the day after easier still, until this whole cycle completes, and you have a few weeks of peace before it starts again. The mint bundle hanging in your kitchen represents more than just one remedy for one complaint. It represents women's ingenuity in the face of suffering, the careful observation and preservation of knowledge that men dismiss as old wives' tales, but that actually works. It represents the unwritten, unrecognized medical tradition that has kept women functional through millennia of monthly pain, childbirth trauma, and all the other specifically female afflictions that official medicine largely ignores. And tonight, when you brew one final cup before bed to ensure you can sleep despite the aching, you'll drink it with gratitude for the plant, for the knowledge, and for all the women who figured this out before you and passed it down. Your memory isn't what it used to be, and you've started to notice the small failures forgetting where you placed the wooden spoon, losing the thread of a conversation mid-sentence. Standing in your garden with no recollection of why you walked out there. You're only 37, which feels ancient in a world where many don't see 40, and the awareness of your mind's gradual dulling terrifies you more than physical pain ever could. So you've returned to the herb your mother swore by when she began experiencing similar troubles, the silvery green plant growing in the sunniest corner of your garden that monks call salvation and wise women call essential, sage for memory, This is knowledge embedded so deeply in your culture that it's become proverbial. Why should a man die while sage grows in his garden, goes the old saying. Though you've noticed it doesn't actually prevent death, just potentially delays some of the deterioration that comes with aging. You gather the leaves carefully in the morning after dew has dried but before the sun grows too hot, because that's when the oils are most concentrated, when the plant's medicine is at its peak potency. The leaves feel fuzzy under your fingertips, textured like soft fabric, and they release their distinctive scent sharp, almost pine-like, with earthy undertones when you brush against them. The mainstream historical fact woven into your morning's harvest is well documented. Sage appears in virtually every medieval medical text as a memory enhancer and general tonic for aging, with its Latin name salvia derived from salvare, meaning to save or to heal. The school of Salerno, that famous medieval medical institution, taught that sage strengthened the nervous system and improved recall. But here's the quirky detail that makes you smile. Medieval herbalists believed that sage plants thrived or withered based on the fortunes of the household, growing vigorously when the family prospered and dying back when misfortune loomed. Historians still argue whether sage actually contains compounds that improve cognitive function, or whether the tradition persists purely through placebo, effect, and wishful thinking. You strip leaves from their stems and lay them on a clean cloth to dry, though you'll also use some fresh in today's tea because there's an intensity to freshly harvested sage that dried leaves can't quite match. The drying process takes several days, the leaves gradually crisping until they crumble at the slightest pressure, and you'll store them in a sealed pottery jar away from light and moisture. Your stores from last year are running low, which is why this morning's harvest feels particularly important. You can't afford to let your supply run out. Not when you're already feeling your mind becoming less reliable. Brewing sage tea requires a gentler touch than mint. You use about 5 or 6 leaves for a single cup, tearing them slightly to release the oils, and you pour water that's hot but not quite boiling because too much heat can make the tea unpleasantly bitter. The steeping time matters too, at least 10 minutes to extract the beneficial compounds, but not so long that the bitterness overwhelms everything else. You've learned these details through trial and error, through years of daily consumption, and you've developed preferences that are probably unique to you. The way everyone's relationship with their medicine becomes personalized over time. The taste of sage tea is assertive, almost aggressive. Nothing like the friendly sweetness of chamomile or even the sharp clarity of mint. It's astringent, drying your mouth slightly, with a complexity that makes you think of autumn forests and ancient rituals. You've grown to appreciate the flavour, or at least you've convinced yourself you have, because the alternative is choking down something unpleasant multiple times per day. Some women add honey to soften the impact, but you prefer it straight, believing perhaps foolishly that suffering through the taste somehow makes the medicine work better. Your mother drank sage tea every morning for the last decade of her life, and while her memory still failed eventually, she remained sharper longer than many of her contemporaries. She could recall details from her childhood with crystal clarity even when she forgot what she'd eaten for breakfast, and she credited the sage for preserving those precious memories. You watched her brew and drink, day after day, and now you're following the same ritual, hoping for the same protection against the dissolution you fear more than death itself. Do you remember what it felt like to have a mind that obeyed you completely, that recalled names and facts and stories without effort? You're starting to lose that certainty, and it's terrifying. Yesterday you couldn't remember your neighbour's daughter's name, a child you've known since birth. and you had to pretend you was calling to someone else when you started to say it and realized the name had simply vanished. These small humiliations are accumulating, and the sage tea is your defense, your attempt to hold on to yourself for as long as possible. The hot flashes started around the same time as the memory troubles, waves of heat that sweep over you at unpredictable moments, leaving you drenched in sweat and disoriented. Your monthly bleeding has become erratic, sometimes absent for months, then returning with vengeful intensity, and you understand that your body is transitioning into something different, something older. The village women have a dozen names for this phase of life, none of them particularly flattering, and no one talks about it openly because women's bodies are supposed to be mysterious and vaguely shameful. But in whispered conversations with other women your age, you've learned that sage helps with the heat as well as the memory, cooling those internal fires that erupt without warning. You drink your first cup of the morning slowly, sitting in the one chair in your cottage that gets morning sun, and you focus on the sensation of the liquid warming your throat, the astringent tannins coating your mouth, the herbal complexity unfolding across your palate. This is meditation disguised as medicine, a moment of stillness in a life that rarely permits stillness. And you've come to treasure these quiet minutes almost as much as you value the sage's therapeutic effects. The world outside can wait while you sit with your tea and try to gather your scattered thoughts into some kind of order. The monks at the abbey 10 miles north grow sage in their medicinal gardens. Great silvery patches of it arranged in neat rows, and they're known throughout the region for their sage preparations. They make tinctures and vinegars, dried bundles and essential oils, and they sell these products to support their community. You've never bought monk-made sage because you have your own supply, but you respect their expertise. Their understanding that this plant deserves careful cultivation and reverent preparation. The fact that men in religious orders take sage seriously lends it a credibility that purely women's remedies often lack. Your daughter watches you drink your morning sage tea with the curious detachment of youth, unable to imagine a future where her own memory might falter or her body might betray her. You haven't started teaching her about sage yet because she doesn't need it, won't need it for years. But you will eventually pass this knowledge down the way your mother passed it to you. You'll tell her about harvest timing and proper drying, about brewing temperature and steeping duration, and about the importance of starting the habit before the problems become severe, because prevention is easier than cure. The second cup of the day comes at mid-morning, after you've completed the most demanding tasks and your mind is starting to feel fuzzy again. You keep a small pouch of dried sage tied to your belt, easy to access when you need it, and you've learned to recognize the signs that indicate you need another dose, the slight confusion, the difficulty finding words, the sense that your thoughts are moving through thick liquid instead of air. The tea acts quickly, or seems to, sharpening the edges of your consciousness and bringing the world back into focus. There's a ritual quality to your sage consumption that goes beyond mere medicine. Each cup is a small act of resistance against the inevitable, a refusal to surrender your mind without a fight. You're not naive enough to believe that sage will keep you sharp forever. You've seen too many old women descend into confusion despite their herbal remedies, but you believe it will buy you time. And time is the most valuable commodity when you're racing against your own deterioration. Every day of clarity is a gift. Every memory successfully recalled is a small victory, and the sage tea is your ally in claiming those victories. By evening, you've drunk 4 cups, maybe 5, and your mouth feels perpetually dry from the tannins. You've developed a habit of chewing a bit of fresh sage leaf before bed, letting the oils coat your tongue and hoping they'll work their magic while you sleep. Your dreams have become more vivid since you started this practice, filled with memories from childhood and faces of people long dead, and you wonder if the sage is somehow unlocking things your waking mind can't access. It's probably imagination, but it's pleasant imagination, so you allow yourself to believe. The salvation that sage offers isn't dramatic or miraculous, it's the quiet preservation of self, the modest defense against dissolution. You're still forgetting things, still struggling with names and tasks, but you're functional in ways that untreated women your age often aren't. You can still manage your household, still care for your children, still participate in village life without being dismissed as a confused old woman. The sage doesn't make you young again, but it lets you remain yourself a little longer, and that's worth every astringent, mouth-drying cup you force down. The exhaustion hits you like a physical weight, pressing down on your shoulders and turning your limbs to lead, and you know without checking that your monthly bleeding has left you anemic again. This happens every few months, especially after a particularly heavy flow or after childbirth, and the signs are unmistakable bone-deep fatigue, dizziness when you stand too quickly, a pallor that makes neighbours ask if you're ill. You're not ill exactly, just depleted, your blood thin and weak, and you need the remedy that grows in the most inconvenient places, protected by stinging defences that make gathering it an act of genuine courage. Nettle tea for iron, this is the prescription that saved your grandmother's life after difficult birth left her unable to stand without fainting, and it's the knowledge you return to whenever you feel your strength draining away. The nettles grow in the damp places, along the stream bank and in the shadowy corners of the forest where the soil is rich and dark. And they grow with such aggressive enthusiasm that they form impenetrable patches taller than your waist. Every inch of their stems and leaves is covered with fine hairs that inject a cocktail of chemicals when touched. Formic acid, histamine, serotonin that burn and itch with remarkable intensity for such small structures. You prepare for the harvest like you're going into battle, wrapping your hands in the thickest leather gloves you own and wearing your oldest, most expendable clothes because nettle stains don't wash out easily. The morning is damp, which is perfect because wet nettles sting less aggressively than dry ones, or so you tell yourself as you approach the patch near the mill. The mainstream historical fact underlying your expedition is well-documented nettles were a staple of medieval medicine and nutrition, appearing in herbals as a blood builder and general tonic, and Saint Hildegard of Bingen specifically recommended nettle preparations for anemia and weakness. But here's the quirky detail: medieval folk believed nettles could protect against witchcraft if hung over doorways, and some claimed that deliberately stinging yourself with nettles could cure joint pain and restore vitality. You grasp the stems firmly through your gloves and cut them near the base with your knife, working quickly because even through leather, you can sometimes feel the burning sensation when a particularly vicious hair finds a gap in your protection. The nettles are at their best in spring when the leaves are young and tender, but autumn nettles still hold value if you're careful to harvest before they flower and seed. You fill your basket with leafy tops, avoiding the older, tougher lower leaves, and by the time you're finished, your forearms are sporting several angry red welts where the gloves didn't quite protect you. The stinging will fade in an hour or two, leaving only the memory of why you hate and love this plant in equal measure. The transformation of nettle from weapon to medicine is almost magical. Those leaves that burned your skin lose their sting completely once dried or cooked, the hairs rendered harmless by heat or desiccation, and what remains is one of the most nutritious plants available to you. Modern analysis would eventually reveal that nettles are extraordinarily rich in iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins. But you don't need laboratory confirmation to know that nettle tea brings strength back to weakened bodies. You've experienced it too many times to doubt the evidence of your own recovery. Back in your kitchen, you hang the nettles in bunches to dry, suspended from the rafters where air circulates freely. As they dry, they release a green, hay-like scent that reminds you of summer meadows, nothing like the aggressive plant you just fought to harvest. Within a few days, they'll be crisp enough to strip from their stems and store in cloth bags, and you'll have enough to last until spring brings fresh growth. But you can't wait days, you need the medicine now, so you take a handful of the fresh leaves, still slightly damp from morning dew, and prepare them for immediate use. Historians still argue whether the iron in nettle tea is bioavailable enough to actually treat anemia, or whether the plant's reputation comes from some other nutritive factor. But you know what you feel? After 3 days of drinking strong nettle tea multiple times daily, the crushing fatigue begins to lift. After a week, you can stand without the world tilting sideways. After 2 weeks, you feel almost normal. Your blood restored to something approximating healthy function. This is empirical evidence collected in your own body, more convincing than any scholar's theory. The preparation of nettle tea is straightforward. You pour boiling water over a generous handful of dried leaves, or fresh leaves if you're brave and desperate, and steep for at least 10 minutes. The liquid turns a deep greenish brown, murky and uninviting, and the taste is earthy, slightly metallic, with a mineral quality that makes sense given what it's supposed to do for your blood. It's not pleasant, but it's not actively disgusting either. Existing in that neutral zone where medicine lives when it's too important to worry about palatability. You drink it plain, though some women add peppermint or raspberry leaf to improve the flavour. Do you remember the exhaustion that came after your last child was born? When climbing the stairs felt like scaling a mountain and even lifting a water bucket made you dizzy, that's the depletion that nettle treats. The specific anemia that comes from blood loss and pregnancy, and the relentless demands of being a woman of childbearing age in a world with marginal nutrition. Your body is constantly giving blood, milk, energy. Life itself, and nettle is one of the few plants that genuinely gives back, replenishing what's been taken. Your relationship with nettle is complicated, marked by both gratitude and resentment. You're grateful for its effectiveness, for the strength it returns to you when you're at your weakest. But you resent the effort required to obtain it, the stings and the inconvenience, and the fact that this medicine can't be gathered gently. Chamomile you can pick with bare hands, breathing in its apple sweetness, but nettle demands respect and pain before it yields its benefits. There's a metaphor there about women's medicine requiring suffering to access healing, but you're too tired to fully articulate it even to yourself. The wise woman Agnes claims that nettle soup is even more effective than tea, and she makes a version with early spring nettles, onions, and a bit of precious butter that's supposed to be extraordinarily restorative. You've tried it once and found it surprisingly edible. The cooked nettles tasting like a more interesting version of spinach, but soup requires more resources than tea ingredients. Thyme, fuel for extended cooking, so you usually stick with the simpler preparation. When you're battling exhaustion, simple is all you can manage. Your daughter helps you now, though you make her wear gloves even thicker than yours and you choose the harvesting locations carefully, avoiding the most aggressive patches. She needs to learn this skill, needs to understand how to identify nettles in all seasons, where they grow best, when to harvest, and how to process them safely. This knowledge is survival information, as essential as knowing which mushrooms are poisonous or which water sources are safe to drink. You're teaching her to read the landscape for medicine, to see food and healing in what others might dismiss as weeds and nuisances. The second cup of the day goes down more easily than the first, your body already anticipating the gradual restoration of strength. You're not expecting miracles. Nettle won't give you energy immediately the way mint relieves cramps within minutes, but you trust the cumulative effect, the slow rebuilding of depleted reserves. By tomorrow you'll feel marginally better. By next week you'll feel functional, and by the time your next heavy bleeding arrives, you'll hopefully have built up enough reserves to weather it without collapsing. The village women trade remedies constantly, sharing what works and warning about what doesn't, and nettle is universally respected among those who know herbs. Even women who can't identify most plants know nettle, though usually from childhood experiences of brushing against it and learning the hard way what those innocent-looking leaves can do. Turning enemy into ally requires knowledge and courage, and there's a satisfaction in mastering something that once hurt you, in transforming pain into healing through nothing but technique and determination. By evening, you've drunk 4 cups, and your body feels marginally less like a sack of wet grain. The dizziness has receded slightly, and you manage to complete your tasks without needing to sit down every few minutes. It's not dramatic improvement, but it's real, measurable, and it confirms what you already knew: nettle works. Tomorrow you'll drink 4 more cups, and the day after, and the day after that, until your blood runs strong again and the exhaustion releases its grip. The nettle bundles hanging from your rafters represent future strength, stored healing waiting to be activated, and their presence comforts you almost as much as the tea itself. Your husband returns from the miller's with blood seeping through the cloth wrapped around his forearm, his face pale and tight with pain, and you know immediately that you'll be spending the rest of the day managing a wound that could easily turn septic if not treated properly. He mutters something about a slipped blade and carelessness, but the details don't matter as much as the gash itself deep enough to be concerning, ragged at the edges, and already showing signs of inflammation. You guide him to the bench by the fire, unwrap the makeshift bandage, and assess the damage with the practiced eye of someone who's dealt with countless injuries in a world without professional medical care. Yarrow for wounds. This is knowledge so ancient it appears in myths and legends. Stories of Achilles using yarrow to treat his soldiers' battle injuries, giving the plant its scientific name Achillea. You keep dried yarrow stored in multiple locations because injuries happen constantly in your world: farm accidents, kitchen mishaps, children's tumbles, animals' kicks, and the ability to stop bleeding and prevent infection can mean the difference between recovery and death. The plant grows wild in your meadows, tall stalks topped with flat clusters of tiny white or pale pink flowers, and you harvest it throughout the summer, gathering both flowers and leaves because both contain the healing compounds you need. You move quickly, filling a pot with water and setting it to heat while you retrieve your yarrow stores from the shelf. The dried flowers crumble slightly as you grab a generous handful, their faint, slightly bitter scent filling the air, and you add them to a bowl where you'll prepare both a wash and a poultice. The mainstream historical fact supporting your actions is well-documented. Yarrow appears in virtually every medieval herbal as a primary wound treatment, valued for its ability to staunch bleeding and promote healing, and battlefield surgeons carried it as essential equipment. But here's the quirky detail that makes you smile despite the urgency. Medieval folk called yarrow devil's nettle, and believed it could divine the future of romantic relationships if placed under your pillow, though you've never noticed it providing any prophetic dreams. Your husband winces as you clean the wound with warm water, wiping away blood and dirt to see the full extent of the damage. It's not as bad as you initially feared, deep but not down to bone. Ragged, but not impossibly so, and you judge that Yarrow should be sufficient without needing to call for the barber surgeon, who costs money you don't have and whose treatments are often more dangerous than the original injury. Historians still argue whether medieval wound care was effective or whether people survived despite rather than because of the treatments. But you've seen Yarrow work too many times to doubt its value. You pour hot water over the dried yarrow in your bowl, creating a strong infusion that immediately turns greenish gold. While it steeps, you take another handful of dried yarrow and grind it between your palms, reducing it to a coarse powder that you'll pack directly into the wound. This is the part your husband dreads, the application of plant matter to raw flesh, but it's also the most important step. The yarrow contains compounds that encourage blood clotting, reduce inflammation, and have genuine antimicrobial properties. Though you think of it more simply as stops bleeding and keeps wounds clean. Do you remember the last time you felt truly helpless? Watching someone you care about suffer and knowing you might not be able to fix it. That's the feeling that drives you to master wound care, to maintain comprehensive stores of healing plants, to practice these techniques until they become automatic. Your husband's injury is manageable, but you've also dealt with far worse the neighbour's son who nearly severed his hand with an axe, your own daughter's head wound from a fall, the infection that claimed your uncle's leg because it wasn't treated quickly enough. Each experience has taught you something, added to your knowledge base, made you marginally more competent at preventing death. You strain the yarrow infusion through clean linen, capturing the liquid in a cup while reserving the spent plant material for the poultice. The tea, because that's essentially what it is, glows amber in the firelight, and you have your husband drink a cup of it while you work on his arm. Taken internally, yarrow acts as an anti-inflammatory and possibly helps with clotting from the inside. Or at least that's the theory passed down through generations of healers. He grimaces at the bitter, astringent taste, but drinks it obediently because he knows better than to argue with you about medical matters. The wound cleaning is methodical and probably more painful than the original injury. You use the warm yarrow infusion to flush the gash repeatedly, washing away any debris that might cause infection. And you can see him gritting his teeth against the sting. Medieval pain management consists largely of endure it, occasionally supplemented with strong alcohol if the injury is severe enough to warrant wasting expensive spirits, and this situation doesn't quite qualify. So he endures while you work, and you try to be as gentle as thoroughness allows. Once the wound is clean, you pack it with the yarrow powder, pressing the herb directly into the gash and watching as it begins to work almost immediately. The bleeding, which had slowed but not stopped, finally ceases as the yarrow's clotting properties take effect. You can actually see it happening, the powder absorbing blood, turning darker, and somehow encouraging the blood vessels to constrict and seal. It's not instant or magical, but it's reliably effective. And within minutes, the wound has stopped weeping blood entirely. The poultice comes next. That soggy mass of spent yarrow flowers and leaves that you've wrung partially dry and warmed slightly. You pack this over the wound, creating a thick layer of plant material held in place by clean linen strips wrapped firmly around your husband's forearm. The poultice serves multiple purposes. It keeps the wound moist for better healing, continues delivering medicinal compounds through prolonged contact, and acts as a protective barrier against dirt and further injury. You'll change it twice daily, inspecting for signs of infection, and you'll have him drink yarrow tea 3 times daily to support healing from within. Your stores of yarrow are extensive because you can't risk running out of this particular medicine. You have bundles hanging to dry, jars of previously dried material, and even a vinegar extraction you prepared last summer by soaking fresh yarrow in strong vinegar for weeks. Different preparations serve different purposes: the dried herb for immediate use, the tea for internal consumption and wound washing, the vinegar for long-term preservation and particularly stubborn infections. This comprehensive approach to a single plant reflects the reality of medieval medicine. You can't run to a pharmacy for antibiotics, so you need multiple forms of your most essential remedies always available. The village wise woman Agnes, who taught you most of what you know about wound care, swears that yarrow picked on Midsummer's Eve has enhanced potency, and while you're sceptical of timing-based magic, you do harvest a special batch during that period just in case she's right. Agnes also claims yarrow can stop nosebleeds instantly if you insert fresh leaves into the nostrils, which sounds absurd but actually works when you've tested it. She's full of yarrow lore stories about soldiers chewing yarrow before battle to prevent excessive bleeding, accounts of women using it for hemorrhaging after childbirth, legends about magical properties you mostly dismiss but partially wonder about. Your husband's colour is already improving, the pain lessening now that the wound is properly dressed, and he manages a weak smile as you tie off the final bandage. You instruct him firmly no heavy work for at least a week. Keep the wound dry, report any increase in pain or redness immediately, and drink every cup of yarrow tea you give him without complaint. He nods agreement, knowing that your medical authority in the household is absolute and that arguing would be both foolish and potentially fatal. The yarrow growing in your meadow represents a kind of insurance policy, a guarantee that you can handle most common injuries without external help. You've taught your oldest daughter to identify the plant in all its growth stages, the feathery leaves that appear in spring, the flat flower clusters of summer, even the dried stalks of winter. She can harvest it properly, dry it correctly, and prepare basic poultices, though she hasn't yet developed the confidence to handle serious wounds independently. That will come with time and unfortunately with practice, because injuries are inevitable in your world. By evening, you've brewed another pot of yarrow tea, this time for yourself because the stress of managing an injury always leaves you feeling depleted, and you know the plant's calming properties will help you sleep. The taste has become familiar over the years, bitter, astringent, slightly aromatic with an undertone that reminds you of chamomile's distant, less friendly cousin. You drink it while checking your husband's bandage one final time, satisfied to see no blood seeping through and no signs of the angry redness that would indicate developing infection. The yarrow bundles hanging throughout your cottage are more than decoration or even simple medicine storage. They're a visible reminder of your capability, your knowledge, your ability to protect your family from at least some of the dangers that surround them constantly. You can't prevent injuries, but you can treat them competently, and that competence has saved lives. The plant that grows so abundantly in your meadow that most people walk past without noticing is one of your most valuable possessions, worth more than silver because it purchases something far more precious than goods or services. It purchases survival, time, the chance to heal rather than die from wounds that in another household, without yarrow and the knowledge to use it properly, might prove fatal. The anxiety arrives without warning, a tightness in your chest that makes breathing feel like work, and your thoughts begin racing in circles that lead nowhere productive. Tonight you're worrying about winter stores that might not be sufficient, about your daughter's cough that could turn into something serious, about the rising cost of grain and whether your husband's work will earn enough to see the family through until spring. These worries aren't irrational, they're all legitimate concerns in a world where survival is never guaranteed, but the intensity of your anxiety is disproportionate, paralyzing rather than motivating, and you recognize the signs of a spiral that will keep you awake all night if you don't intervene. You reach for lavender, that purple-spiked plant growing in the sunniest, driest corner of your garden, the herb that smells like summer condensed into floral perfection and has the miraculous ability to quiet racing thoughts. You cultivate lavender carefully because it's finicky about drainage and cold, sometimes failing to survive harsh winters, but when it thrives, it provides medicine you can obtain nowhere else. The spikes you harvested in July are dried now, their colour faded from vibrant purple to dusty grey-violet, but their scent remains potent sweet, floral, slightly camphoraceous, instantly calming even before you've brewed them into tea. The mainstream historical fact underlying your evening ritual is well-documented lavender appears throughout medieval herbals as a treatment for nervous conditions, insomnia, and what they called melancholy. And monastery gardens throughout Europe grew it extensively both for medicine and for perfuming linens. The name itself comes from the Latin lavare, meaning to wash, because Romans added it to bath water for its soothing properties. But here's the quirky detail: medieval folk believed lavender could preserve chastity if worn or carried, and that it could reveal the identity of witches if thrown into midsummer bonfires. Though you've never tested either claim and don't particularly care to, you strip a dozen flower spikes into your brewing pot, crushing them slightly between your fingers to release the volatile oils that contain lavender's medicinal compounds. Modern science would eventually identify linalool and linaloyl acetate as the primary anxiolytic constituents, but you simply know that lavender tea slows your heartbeat, eases the constriction in your chest, and allows sleep to find you on nights when anxiety would otherwise keep you staring at darkness until dawn. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced anxiety as a distinct condition, or whether their concerns were simply too immediate and survival-focused to permit the luxury of generalized worry. But you know what you feel, and you feel anxious. The water you pour over the lavender is hot but not boiling. You've learned that excessive heat drives off the delicate aromatic compounds that make lavender effective, leaving behind only bitter plant matter without the soothing properties you need. You cover the pot with a cloth to trap the steam and let it steep for exactly 10 minutes, counting slowly to yourself as a form of meditation, focusing on the numbers to distract from the circular worries. The ritual itself is calming, the familiar steps and predictable timing providing structure when your thoughts have none. Do you remember what it feels like to be truly calm? To have a mind that rests instead of races? To lie down at night and simply fall asleep instead of cataloguing every possible disaster you remember? Barely. And lavender tea is your bridge back to that state. Or at least to something approximating it. The tea won't solve your problems, your winter stores are still potentially insufficient, your daughter's cough is still concerning, but it will allow you to approach these problems from a place of relative peace instead of panic. The first sip is almost overwhelmingly floral, the taste matching the scent but intensified, and you've grown to associate this particular flavour with the relief that follows. Your shoulders drop slightly. Tension you didn't realise you were holding begins to release, and the racing thoughts slow to something more manageable. It's not immediate or dramatic. Lavender isn't opium, doesn't obliterate consciousness, but within a quarter hour, you can feel the shift from frantic to merely concerned, from paralysed to capable of rest. Your mother never used lavender for anxiety because she never admitted to experiencing anxiety, maintaining the stoic facade expected of women who'd survived worse than whatever current trouble presented itself. but you've noticed her fingers worrying at her apron during difficult times, seen the shadows under her eyes that suggested sleepless nights, and you wonder if she might have benefited from this particular remedy. Your generation seems more willing to acknowledge that fear and worry can be treated, that mental suffering deserves the same attention as physical pain, though you'd never articulate this openly because it sounds dangerously like admitting weakness. The village wise woman Agnes uses lavender extensively, burning it as incense during her healing sessions and creating elaborate preparations with vinegar and honey that she claims are superior to simple tea. You've tried her remedies and found them effective but unnecessarily complicated. Sometimes the simplest preparation works best, and lavender tea is simple. You harvest, you dry, you steep, you drink. No elaborate procedures, no rare ingredients, just plant and water and heat combining to create relief. Your daughter inherited your tendency toward anxious thoughts. Though at her age they manifest as nightmares and fear of darkness rather than the adult worries that plague you. You've started giving her weak lavender tea before bed, just a few sips mixed with honey, and her sleep has improved noticeably. Teaching her early that anxiety can be managed rather than endured feels important, like you're giving her tools your mother never gave you. She's learning that uncomfortable feelings aren't permanent, that relief exists, that plants can be allies against the storms in your mind. The second cup goes down more easily, your body already relaxing in anticipation of the effect, and you settle into your chair with something approaching contentment. The worries haven't disappeared, they're still there, waiting at the edges of your consciousness, but they've lost their urgency, their ability to dominate every thought. You can acknowledge them without being consumed by them, which is perhaps all anyone can reasonably hope for in a world that provides abundant legitimate reasons for concern. Lavender grows slowly, requiring patience that mirrors the patience needed to manage anxiety itself. You can't rush the plants or force them to produce more flowers through sheer will, and similarly, you can't command your anxiety to vanish just because you'd prefer it gone. Both require careful tending, appropriate conditions, and acceptance that some things develop on their own timeline regardless of your preferences. This parallel isn't lost on you as you sip your tea and watch the fire burn down to coals. The scent of lavender fills your small cottage now, mixing with wood smoke and the lingering smell of evening cooking, and you breathe it in deliberately, using the aroma as an anchor to the present moment. Anxiety lives in the future, in catastrophes that haven't happened and might never happen, and lavender pulls you back to now, to the warmth of the fire, the taste of tea, the solid reality of your chair and your body, and this specific moment that contains no disaster. By the time you finish your second cup, the exhaustion you've been holding at bay through sheer anxious energy finally settles over you like a familiar blanket. Your mind has quieted enough to permit sleep, the racing thoughts reduced to a gentle murmur, and you bank the fire and climb into bed with genuine hope that you'll actually rest tonight. The lavender bundles hanging in your bedroom add their scent to the darkness, a final layer of aromatherapy that complements the tea you've consumed. Your husband stirs as you settle beside him, mumbles something incomprehensible, and returns to sleep. He doesn't understand anxiety the way you do. His worries are practical and temporary, easily dismissed once addressed, but he's learned to recognize the signs when you're struggling and has stopped asking if you're well when you're clearly not. The lavender tea is your private remedy, your personal tool for managing what you can't explain and he can't comprehend, and that's sufficient. The darkness behind your closed eyelids is softer tonight, less threatening, and you feel yourself drifting towards sleep with gratitude for the plant growing in your garden, and the knowledge passed down through generations of anxious women who found relief in purple flowers, Tomorrow might bring legitimate reasons for worry, but tonight you'll sleep, and that's victory enough. The lavender has done its work, quieting the chaos, gentling the panic, transforming impossible wakefulness into merciful rest. Spring arrives with its usual deceptions, warm days that promise renewal, followed by cold nights that remind you winter hasn't truly surrendered, and your body feels sluggish, heavy, as though you're carrying the accumulated weight of months spent indoors eating preserved foods that lack the vitality of fresh growth. Your skin has a greyish cast, your digestion is unreliable, and you wake each morning feeling contaminated from within, as though your blood is thickened with toxins that need purging. This is the seasonal malaise that medieval physicians call an imbalance of humours, but you think of it more simply as winter's residue, the physical price of surviving on salted meat, stored grains, and root vegetables that lost their nutritional value months ago. You venture into the meadow on a morning when the ground has finally softened enough to dig, searching for the plants with cheerful yellow flowers that most people dismiss as weeds, but you recognise as essential spring medicine. Dandelions are everywhere, their jagged leaves spreading in rosettes across disturbed soil, and you've come to harvest the roots thick, white taproots that burrow deep into earth and contain bitter compounds specifically suited to cleansing what you think of as winter's corruption. You bring a small spade and a basket, and you dig carefully, trying to extract entire roots without breaking them, though some always snap and you gather those pieces anyway because medicine is too valuable to waste. The mainstream historical fact supporting your morning's labour is well-documented dandelion root appears in medieval herbals as a liver tonic and spring purifier, with Arabic physicians particularly valuing it for digestive and urinary complaints. The name itself derived from the French dent de lion, lion's tooth, referring to the jagged leaf edges indicates how long Europeans have been paying attention to this plant. But here's the quirky detail that makes you smile while you dig. Medieval folk believed dandelion seeds could carry wishes and messages to the fairy realm when blown into wind. And children still practice this today, though you've never noticed any wishes coming true as a result. Your basket fills slowly with mud-caked roots, each one requiring careful cleaning before it can be processed. And by the time you've gathered what you need, your hands are filthy and your back aches from bending. The roots themselves are surprisingly substantial, some as thick as your thumb and nearly a foot long, and their broken ends weep a white latex that stains your fingers and has a bitterness you can taste just from the smell. These roots contain the medicine you need: compounds that stimulate bile production, support liver function, and act as diuretics to flush accumulated wastes, though you think of it less scientifically as cleaning out the bad winter humours. Back in your kitchen, you scrub the roots in cold water, removing dirt and small root hairs until they're relatively clean. Historians still argue whether medieval concepts of detoxification had any basis in physiological reality, or whether spring tonic rituals were purely cultural practices with placebo effects. But you know how you feel after a week of drinking dandelion root tea: clearer, lighter, more energetic, and that's evidence enough for your purposes. The roots can be used fresh, but you prefer to dry them first, slicing them lengthwise and laying them in the sun until they're leathery and darker, almost brown, because drying concentrates the bitter principles that make the medicine work. The preparation of dandelion root tea is more involved than most of your remedies. The dried roots must be roasted slightly over your fire, turning them even darker and developing flavours that make the resulting brew almost coffee-like, though far more bitter than any coffee you've tasted on the rare occasions when that exotic luxury passed through your village. You break the roasted roots into small pieces and simmer them not just steep, but actually boil them for at least 20 minutes to extract the deep-rooted compounds that your body needs to expel winter's accumulation. Do you remember what it felt like to have energy that wasn't forced? To wake feeling refreshed rather than sluggish? To have digestion that worked smoothly without complaint? That's what you're seeking as you brew your first pot of dandelion root tea. That return to baseline health that winter's deprivations have stolen. The liquid that results from your simmering is dark brown, almost black, and the smell rising from it is earthy, bitter, reminiscent of wet soil and ancient forests. The taste, when you finally steel yourself to take that first sip, is aggressively bitter, so bitter it makes your face contort and your tongue recoil. But you know this bitterness is the point. That bitter flavours stimulate digestive secretions and liver activity in ways sweet or neutral flavours cannot. You've added nothing to soften the impact because your mother taught you that spring tonic should taste unpleasant, that the body's need for cleansing is proportional to your willingness to endure bitterness. This might be folk wisdom without foundation, but it's also possibly true that the bitter compounds themselves are the medicine, and diluting them with honey would reduce effectiveness. So you drink it straight, grimacing through every swallow, and within an hour you notice the first effects: increased urination, a subtle cramping in your abdomen that signals increased intestinal activity, and a curious mental clarity as though fog is lifting from your thoughts. The village wise woman Agnes makes dandelion root preparations for half the village every spring, selling them to people who either lack the knowledge to make their own or simply prefer buying convenience. Her version is stronger than yours, possibly because she knows some technique you haven't mastered, and she charges prices that reflect both her expertise and people's desperation to feel better after winter. You've never bought her preparations because you can make your own, but you respect the fact that her dandelion business helps support her through the year, giving her income from a plant that grows freely everywhere. Your husband refuses to drink dandelion root tea, claiming it tastes like dirt brewed with poison, and you don't argue because watching him try it once was entertaining enough that you don't need a repeat performance. Men in your world are less tolerant of bitter medicines, perhaps because they're not conditioned from childhood to endure discomfort without complaint the way women are. Or perhaps they simply haven't experienced the transformative effects of proper spring cleansing, and therefore don't understand that temporary unpleasantness is worth the resulting improvement. The dandelions growing in your meadow and along your paths are inexhaustible, regenerating from the smallest root fragments left in soil, and this abundance feels appropriate for a plant that serves such a fundamental purpose. Spring cleaning isn't just for cottages and clothes, it's for bodies too, for flushing out what's accumulated when you couldn't access fresh foods or proper hydration. The dandelion's timing is perfect, emerging just when you need it most, offering both greens for eating and roots for medicine at precisely the moment when winter stores are exhausted and fresh garden vegetables aren't yet available. By afternoon, you've consumed 3 cups of the bitter brew, and your body is responding vigorously. Your bladder demands frequent attention. Your bowels are more active than they've been in weeks, and you feel simultaneously drained and energized, as though something heavy is being lifted away even as the process of lifting exhausts you. This is normal, expected, the body's response to finally having tools to eliminate what it's been holding onto through months of suboptimal function. Your daughter watches you drink with horrified fascination, and you've started preparing her mentally for the day when she'll need to do this too, explaining that spring cleaning applies to people as much as to houses. She's young enough to still have resilient health that doesn't require such aggressive intervention, but she'll need this knowledge eventually, and watching you suffer through bitter medicine now will make her own future compliance easier. You're teaching her that some discomfort serves necessary purposes, that not everything that helps tastes good, and that women's work includes maintaining their own bodies as carefully as they maintain their households. The second batch of tea you brew is marginally less bitter than the first, possibly because your taste buds have been numbed into submission, or possibly because you're developing tolerance the way you eventually develop tolerance for all difficult but necessary things. You'll continue this regimen for at least a week, maybe 2 if you feel you need it, drinking the bitter brew multiple times daily until you're satisfied that winter's residue has been adequately purged. By then, the wild greens will be growing fresh dandelion leaves, young nettles, chickweed, sorrel, and you can shift from aggressive detoxification to gentle nutritional rebuilding. The dandelion roots stored in your cottage represent more than just spring medicine. They represent the cyclical nature of health maintenance in a world without modern pharmaceuticals. Spring brings cleansing. Summer brings strengthening. Autumn brings preparation. Winter brings endurance. And then spring returns with its demand for renewal. The bitter tea you're choking down is your participation in this cycle. Your acknowledgement that bodies require active maintenance, and that feeling good requires effort, discomfort, and plants most people ignore as they walk past. The fever announces itself in the pre-dawn hours with chills that make your teeth chatter, despite the warmth of blankets piled high. And by the time pale light filters through your window, you're burning hot to the touch. Your forehead radiating heat that frightens your daughter when she checks on you. This is the pattern of fevers in your world. They arrive suddenly, they escalate quickly, and they can kill if not managed properly. Your husband has already left for the fields, unaware that you're ill, and your older children are stirring with their usual morning needs, oblivious to the fact that you're in no condition to meet them. But you force yourself upright because lying helpless isn't an option when you have responsibilities, and you stumble to your herb stores seeking the remedy you need most urgently, elder. For fever breaking, this is ancient knowledge preserved through countless epidemics and seasonal illnesses. The understanding that creamy white elderflowers contain compounds that open pores and stimulate sweating, the body's primary mechanism for releasing dangerous heat. You keep dried elderflowers stored in a sealed jar because they're too valuable to risk losing to moisture or pests. And you harvested them last June when the elder trees along the stream were covered in flat-topped clusters of tiny blooms that smelled sweet and slightly musty. Your hands shake as you measure out a generous portion, more than you'd use for ordinary ailments. Because fever requires aggressive treatment, and elderflower is specifically designed to provoke the sweating response that breaks fever's grip. The mainstream historical fact underlying your desperate brewing is well documented. Elderflower tea appears throughout medieval medical literature as a febrifuge and sudorific recommended by physicians from Hippocrates onward for its ability to induce therapeutic sweating. The Anglo-Saxon leech books prescribe elder for fever, and monastic herbals list it as essential medicine. But here's the quirky detail: medieval folk believed elder trees were inhabited by protective spirits, and you were supposed to ask permission before harvesting, offering thanks to the elder mother who supposedly lived in the branches. Historians still argue whether elderflower tea actually reduces fever through pharmacological action, or whether the sweating it produces is simply the body's response to consuming hot liquid. But you've seen it work too many times to care about the mechanism. You pour boiling water over the dried flowers, watching them rehydrate and release their distinctive scent, sweet floral, with honeyed undertones, and that peculiar musty note that's impossible to describe, but instantly recognizable. The tea needs to steep strongly, at least 15 minutes, because you need maximum potency to fight a fever that's already making your vision blur at the edges and your limbs feel distant and unreliable. While you wait, you wrap yourself in your heaviest cloak despite the fact that you're burning up. Because the sweating cure requires heat, you need to get hotter before you can get cooler. Need to push the fever to its breaking point rather than trying to suppress it. Your daughter brings you the strained tea, her face worried in the way children look when their parents show vulnerability, and you drink it as hot as you can stand, forcing down cup after cup even though your stomach rebels and your throat feels raw. The taste is pleasant enough. Elderflower tea is one of the more agreeable medicines, but consuming this much liquid when you're already nauseous requires determination. Within minutes, you feel the effect beginning a prickling sensation across your skin, a warmth that intensifies the fever you're already suffering. And then the sweat starts. Do you remember what it feels like to sweat so profusely that your clothes become drenched? That moisture runs down your face and back in streams, that you can wring liquid from your shift like you've been swimming. This is the elderflower cure. This drowning in your own perspiration. And it's deeply unpleasant but also strangely reassuring because sweating means the medicine is working, means your body is responding appropriately, means the fever will break if you can just endure the process. You pile on more blankets despite your impulse to throw them off, because you've learned that the sweating needs to be prolonged and thorough, not just a brief dampness, but a sustained deluge that carries the fever out through your pores. Your mother used elderflower tea for every fever that struck the household, and you remember lying as a feverish child wrapped in blankets that seemed to weigh as much as stones, sweating until the sheets beneath you were soaked, and then finally feeling the fever break like a wave receding, leaving you weak but clear-headed and cool. She would change the bedding immediately, stripping away the sweat-soaked linens and replacing them with dry cloth, and she'd brew a second, weaker pot of elderflower to continue the process more gently. You're following her example now, trusting the traditional protocol even as every instinct screams at you to throw off the suffocating blankets and seek cool air. The village wise woman Agnes claims that elderflower picked on midsummer's morning has enhanced fever-breaking properties, and while you're sceptical of such specific timing requirements, you did harvest a special batch during that period just to hedge your bets. The flowers you're using now might or might not be midsummer flowers. You've lost track of which jar is which, but they're working regardless. Your body responding to whatever compounds the flowers contain with the vigorous sweating that signals successful treatment. Agnes also makes elderflower cordial by steeping fresh flowers in honey and water, creating a preparation that keeps for months and can be diluted for fever treatment. But you prefer the simplicity of dried flowers and plain tea. The sweating intensifies until you're genuinely miserable. Every inch of your skin slick with moisture, your hair plastered to your head, your clothing adhering to your body like a second skin. This is the crucial moment, the point where fever either breaks or continues escalating, and you can feel it happening. Feel the dangerous heat that was cooking you from the inside beginning to dissipate, carried away in the flood of perspiration. Your vision clears slightly. The blurring at the edges of your perception sharpens, and you know you've passed through the worst of it. Your daughter helps you change into dry clothes, her small hands efficient and gentle, and she brings fresh elderflower tea, cooler this time, for you to sip slowly. The fever hasn't disappeared entirely, it's still present, making you feel flushed and tired, but the dangerous spike has been blunted, reduced from potentially lethal to merely uncomfortable. You'll continue drinking elderflower tea throughout the day, encouraging continued sweating but at a less dramatic level. And by evening the fever should be manageable enough that you can sleep without fear of it escalating dangerously during the night. The elder trees growing along the stream are considered magical by some villagers, who claim they protect against witchcraft and evil spirits if planted near houses. You don't believe in such things, but you respect the trees for their reliable medicine, and you harvest from them carefully, never taking so much that the trees suffer, always thanking them silently even though you don't believe in elder mothers or tree spirits. It's possible to appreciate a plant's value without believing in its supposed supernatural properties. And your pragmatic approach to elder has served you well over the years. The weakness that follows fever breaking is profound, a bone-deep exhaustion that makes even sitting upright feel like significant effort, and you surrender to it, because fighting exhaustion when you're recovering from fever is counterproductive. Your body has just performed intense work raising temperature, sweating profusely, fighting whatever infection triggered the fever, and it needs rest to complete the healing process. The elderflower tea has done its primary job, breaking the fever before it could escalate to dangerous levels. And now your responsibility is simply to rest, hydrate, and let your body finish what the medicine started. By midday, you're feeling almost normal, the fever reduced to a slight warmth and the exhaustion becoming bearable. And you're grateful once again for the knowledge that transforms trees into pharmacies and flowers into fever medicine. Your husband returns at evening to find you recovered enough to prepare a simple meal, and he barely comments on your illness because fevers are common enough to not warrant much attention unless they prove fatal. You don't tell him how close you might have come to serious danger, how the fever felt when it first spiked, because there's no point worrying him about what didn't happen. The elderflower jar in your cupboard represents security against one of life's most common threats, the sudden fever that can escalate from minor inconvenience to fatal crisis within hours. You've seen people die from fever, seen children particularly succumb when the heat couldn't be controlled, and you know that your survival this morning depended on having the right medicine available immediately and knowing exactly how to use it. The elderflowers you gathered last June, dried carefully and stored properly, just saved your life or at least prevented serious illness. And that's not dramatic exaggeration, that's simply the reality of medieval healthcare, where the difference between life and death often comes down to which plants you know and whether you have them ready when needed. The darkness has weight tonight, pressing down on your chest and turning your thoughts to ash, and you recognize the signs of melancholy settling over you like a suffocating blanket. This isn't the ordinary sadness that comes with specific losses or disappointments. This is the black bile rising, as physicians would say, the inexplicable heaviness that makes every task feel impossible and every future moment seem equally bleak. You've experienced this before, usually in late autumn when daylight shrinks and cold penetrates everything, and you know that left untreated, this darkness can deepen into something truly dangerous, into the kind of despair that makes women stop eating, stop caring, stop wanting to continue the exhausting work of survival. You reach for lemon balm, that bright green plant growing near your doorstep that smells like lemons mixed with mint and has the remarkable ability to lift spirits when everything else feels heavy. The monks at the nearby monastery cultivate lemon balm extensively, calling it the gladdening herb and using it to treat what they diplomatically call troubled hearts and anxious minds. You dried bundles of it last summer, hanging them in the shadiest part of your kitchen because too much sun bleaches away the essential oils that make the medicine work. And now you strip leaves from brittle stems, crushing them slightly to release that citrus mint fragrance that already seems to brighten the air around you. The mainstream historical fact supporting your midnight remedy as well-documented lemon balm appears in medieval herbals as a treatment for melancholy and nervous disorders, with the 11th century physician Avicenna praising it for making the heart merry and driving away dark thoughts. The Carmelite monks created a famous lemon balm preparation they called Carmelite water, used throughout Europe for nervous complaints and low spirits. But here's the quirky detail that makes you wonder about the monks' true motivations. Lemon balm was also believed to ensure longevity if consumed regularly, with some claiming it could extend life by decades. Historians still argue whether lemon balm contains compounds that genuinely affect mood, or whether its pleasant taste and aroma simply provide temporary distraction from unhappiness. You pour hot water over a generous handful of the dried leaves, more than you'd use for ordinary tea, because melancholy requires aggressive treatment before it takes deeper root. The water immediately turns pale green gold, and the steam rising from the cup carries that distinctive lemony scent that seems almost too cheerful for your current state of mind. You wrap both hands around the cup, letting the warmth penetrate your palms, and you breathe deeply, drawing the aromatic vapours into your lungs, using the scent itself as part of the medicine before you've even tasted the liquid. The first sip is intensely lemony, bright and almost sharp, with the mint undertones providing cooling complexity and a slight bitterness that keeps the flavour from becoming cloying. It's refreshing in a way that seems at odds with your heavy mood, and there's something almost offensive about this cheerfulness, this plant insisting on brightness when you feel only darkness. But you continue drinking, forcing yourself through each swallow, because you've learned that feelings don't have to be honoured or indulged. Sometimes they simply need to be medicated until they pass. Do you remember what it felt like to wake with energy and hope instead of dread? To move through your day with purpose instead of mechanical endurance? To believe that tomorrow might be better than today? Those feelings seem impossibly distant right now, but you know they exist because you've experienced them. And lemon balm tea is your bridge back to that lighter state, or at least to something approaching functionality. The darkness won't disappear instantly. Melancholy doesn't work that way, but the lemon balm will take the edge off, will make the weight slightly less crushing, will create enough space for you to remember that this feeling is temporary, even when it insists on feeling permanent. Your mother suffered from melancholy, though she never called it that. And you remember entire weeks when she moved through household tasks like a ghost, her face expressionless and her eyes focused on nothing. She didn't have lemon balm, or if she did, she didn't know to use it, and she simply endured the darkness until it eventually lifted on its own. You've inherited her tendency toward these dark moods, but you've also inherited the determination not to suffer unnecessarily when remedies exist. The lemon balm growing by your door is your insurance policy against becoming what your mother became, a woman lost in her own despair, unreachable even to her children. The village wise woman Agnes makes lemon balm preparations with honey and brandy when she can obtain the spirits, creating a syrup she claims works faster and more powerfully than simple tea. You've tried it once and found it effective but too expensive to maintain. As a regular remedy, brandy costs money you don't have for luxuries. So you stick with tea, the democratic medicine available to anyone with a plant and hot water, and you've found it sufficient for managing most episodes of melancholy before they become incapacitating. Your daughter sleeps in the next room, oblivious to your midnight struggle, and you're grateful she hasn't inherited this particular affliction, or at least hasn't shown signs of it yet. You hope she never does. Hope she moves through life with the uncomplicated emotions that seem to come naturally to some people but remain forever elusive to others. If she does develop melancholy, though, you'll teach her about lemon balm, about recognizing the early signs and treating them aggressively before they deepen, about refusing to romanticize darkness when practical remedies exist. The second cup goes down more easily, your body already responding to the first dose, and you can feel a subtle shift, not happiness, not even contentment, but a loosening of the crushing weight, a sense that breathing requires slightly less effort. The melancholy hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer absolutely dominant, and that small victory feels enormous when measured against how you felt an hour ago. You'll sleep now, or try to, and tomorrow you'll brew more lemon balm, and the day after, and you'll continue until this episode passes the way previous episodes have passed. The monks who grow lemon balm in their monastery gardens understand something important about human nature, that people need help maintaining hopeful attitudes, that life provides abundant reasons for despair, and that plants can be allies in the ongoing struggle to remain functional despite darkness. They're not naive about lemon balm being a complete cure, but they're practical about it being a useful tool, and their willingness to cultivate and distribute it suggests they've seen its benefits demonstrated repeatedly. The lemon balm growing outside your door is actually a descendant of monastery plants, given to you years ago by a travelling monk who stayed overnight in your village and noticed you seemed troubled. He pressed a small potted plant into your hands with instructions for care and use, and you've propagated it since then, dividing the roots and spreading it around your cottage until you have more than enough for your needs. That small act of monastic charity has provided years of relief, and you sometimes wonder if the monk understood exactly how valuable his gift would prove. By the third cup, you're feeling tired in a normal way rather than the exhausted heaviness of melancholy, and this feels like progress. The lemon balm has done what it can do in a single night. It's blunted the worst of the darkness, created enough space for you to rest, reminded you that this feeling isn't permanent even when it insists otherwise. Tomorrow you'll continue the treatment, and you'll force yourself through the day's tasks even when they feel meaningless, because you've learned that movement and activity help fight melancholy almost as much as medicine does. The steam rising from your cup carries its cheerful lemon scent into the darkness of your cottage, a small brightness in the overwhelming night, and you focus on that scent as an anchor to something outside yourself. Melancholy turns thoughts inward in destructive ways, creating loops of negative thinking that feed on themselves, and lemon balm provides an external focus, something bright and pleasant that demands attention outside your own head. It's a simple intervention, almost embarrassingly simple, but simplicity doesn't diminish effectiveness. Your husband sleeps undisturbed in the next room, unaware of your midnight struggle, and you don't resent his obliviousness because explaining melancholy to someone who's never experienced it is impossible. They hear the words but can't comprehend the reality, can't understand how thought itself can become toxic or how the future can seem like nothing but more suffering. So you manage this alone, the way women manage most internal struggles, using the tools available and not expecting understanding or support from people who lack the capacity to provide either. The lemon balm growing around your cottage represents more than just medicine for dark moods. It represents the accumulated wisdom of people who recognize that mental suffering deserves treatment as much as physical pain, that herbs can affect thoughts and feelings as reliably as they affect bodies. Your melancholy hasn't disappeared, won't disappear tonight, but it's been reduced to something manageable. And manageable is all you need to continue surviving in a world that provides few accommodations for people struggling with invisible afflictions. The cold settles into your bones in November, penetrating through wool and leather until even sitting by the fire feels insufficient, And you know from experience that this internal chill makes you vulnerable to every illness circulating through the village. Your hands are perpetually icy, your feet numb despite thick stockings, and there's a weakness in your limbs that suggests your body is struggling to maintain the warmth necessary for proper function. This isn't merely discomfort. This is the dangerous cold that precedes illness, the internal temperature drop that allows infections to take hold and minor ailments to become serious threats. You need ginger, that knobby root imported from distant lands at prices that make you wince. But you've carefully hoarded a small piece specifically for moments like this when internal fire needs rekindling. Ginger doesn't grow in your climate, it requires tropical heat and moisture you can't provide, so every fragment is precious, rationed carefully throughout winter and used only when truly necessary. The piece you retrieve from its wrapping is the size of your thumb, brown and wrinkled, and it smells pungent and spicy even before you've cut into it, promising the fierce heat your body desperately needs. The mainstream historical fact underlying your morning remedy is well-documented. Ginger was highly valued in medieval Europe as both medicine and spice, imported along the same trade routes that brought black pepper and cinnamon, and it appears in herbals as a warming agent for cold conditions and digestive troubles. Hildegard of Bingen wrote about ginger's heating properties, and medieval physicians prescribed it for what they called cold ailments based on their humoral theories. But here's the quirky detail: medieval folk believed ginger could reverse aging and restore youthful vigour if consumed regularly, leading to its inclusion in expensive longevity preparations that promised implausible results. Historians still argue whether imported spices like ginger provided genuine medicinal benefits or were simply status symbols whose effectiveness came from placebo and the power of expensive rarity. You slice the ginger root thinly, revealing pale yellow flesh that releases even more of that distinctive aroma: sharp, spicy, almost citrusy, with a heat you can smell as much as feel. Each thin round goes into your brewing pot, and you add more slices than you probably should because desperation makes you generous with precious resources, and you need this to work. The water you pour over the ginger should be as hot as possible, just off the boil, and you let it steep for a long time, extracting every bit of heat-generating compound the root contains. The resulting tea is pale golden, innocent-looking despite the fierce heat it contains, and that first sip is a shock-burning spice that spreads across your tongue and down your throat, a heat that feels almost like pain before it settles into warming intensity. Your eyes water slightly, your sinuses clear immediately, and you can feel warmth beginning to radiate from your core, spreading outward through limbs that have been cold for days. This is why ginger is worth its outrageous price, because nothing else provides this instant, undeniable warming, this rekindling of internal fire that protects against winter's assault. Do you remember what it felt like to be warm from the inside? To have blood that flows easily, and limbs that respond without the sluggishness of cold? Ginger tea brings that memory back to life, transforming your body from something barely functional to something approaching normal. The warming isn't subtle or gentle, it's aggressive, almost overwhelming, a flood of heat that makes you strip off your outer shawl despite the cold room. And this intensity is exactly what you need when ordinary remedies have failed to penetrate the deep chill. Your mother never had ginger, couldn't afford it, even when it appeared in the travelling merchant's cart, and she suffered through winters with her hands so cold they could barely grip tools and her feet so numb she couldn't feel them. You remember watching her struggle? Remember the blue tinge to her lips and the way she shivered constantly despite layers of clothing? And you've sworn never to endure that level of suffering when solutions exist. The ginger costs money better spent on other necessities. But what good is saving money if you're too cold and weak to function? The village wise woman, Agnes, makes ginger preparations by mixing powdered ginger with honey, creating a paste that can be dissolved in hot water or eaten directly for more intense warming effects. You've tried her preparation and found it almost too strong. The concentrated ginger burning your mouth and throat in ways that felt dangerous rather than medicinal. So you prefer the diluted tea where the heat is powerful but manageable. Agnes also adds ginger to everything during winter soups, broths, even bread when she can spare the precious spice, claiming that consistent small doses work better than occasional large ones. Your daughter watches you drink with curious eyes, and when she asks for a taste, you let her sip the tiniest amount, knowing she'll immediately regret it. She does, her face contorts, her eyes widen, and she gasps at the unexpected heat, but she also doesn't spit it out, which shows promising fortitude. You explain that ginger is adult medicine for serious cold, not something children need unless they're dangerously chilled, and you promise her chamomile or mint instead. She accepts this, relieved to avoid more burning spice. And you're glad she's young enough to have natural warmth that doesn't require chemical rekindling. The warming effect of ginger tea lasts for hours, maintaining internal heat long after you finish drinking, and this sustained warmth is what makes it superior to simply sitting closer to the fire or adding more clothing. External warmth helps, certainly, but it doesn't address the internal chill, the sluggish circulation and weakened immune function that makes you vulnerable to illness. Ginger works from the inside out, stimulating circulation, raising metabolic rate, and creating the internal furnace that keeps illness at bay when cold weather makes everyone susceptible. The nausea that sometimes accompanies deep cold also responds to ginger, that queasy, unsettled feeling in your stomach that makes eating unappealing even when you know you need nutrition. Ginger settles digestion while warming the body, a dual action that makes it particularly valuable during winter, when digestive problems often compound the misery of cold. You've used ginger successfully for motion sickness during the one long cart journey you've taken, and you've heard sailors swear by it for seasickness, though you've never been on a ship to test that claim personally. The second cup of ginger tea is easier to drink now that your mouth has adjusted to the heat, and you add a bit of honey this time, partly to preserve the remaining ginger flavour coating your cup and partly because honey itself has warming properties that complement the ginger. The combination is more pleasant than straight ginger, sweet and spicy and soothing despite the underlying fire, and you drink it slowly, savouring both the taste and the spreading warmth. Your hands, which were white and stiff when you woke, have returned to normal colour and flexibility, and you flex your fingers experimentally, grateful for restored function. The cold that was pressing into your chest has retreated, leaving you able to breathe deeply without the tight, constricted feeling that signalled impending illness. The weakness in your limbs has lessened, replaced by something approaching normal energy, and you feel capable of facing the day's work instead of merely enduring it. The ginger wrapped and stored in your cupboard represents a kind of imported security, medicine that travelled thousands of miles to reach your kitchen and costs more than it should, but delivers effects nothing local can match. You've tried to find adequate substitutes: mustard seed for heat, horseradish for spice, but nothing quite replicates ginger's specific warming quality. This dependency on imported medicine troubles you slightly because it means your health partially relies on trade routes remaining open and merchants continuing to find your remote village worth visiting. But the alternatives are suffering through cold that makes you vulnerable or hoping local remedies prove sufficient. The warming continues throughout the morning, sustained by a third cup at midday, and by afternoon you feel almost normal. the dangerous chill completely banished and your body functioning at the level it should. The ginger has done its work, kindled the internal fire that winter tried to extinguish, and you've successfully prevented what could have become a serious illness. Tomorrow you'll drink more ginger tea as prevention, maintaining the warmth rather than letting it slip away again, and you'll continue this practice throughout the coldest months, rationing your precious root to last until spring brings natural warmth that makes chemical warming unnecessary. The pain in your chest has been growing for weeks, a tightness that makes climbing stairs difficult and leaves you breathless after tasks that shouldn't exhaust you, and you recognize the signs your own mother displayed in the years before her heart finally failed. You're only in your early 40s, which feels impossibly young for heart troubles, but hard work, multiple pregnancies, and a lifetime of marginal nutrition have aged your body beyond your years. The fluttering irregular beats that wake you at night, the swelling in your ankles by evening, the breathlessness that comes with minimal exertion, these are symptoms you can't ignore. Warning signs that your heart is struggling with the relentless work of pumping blood through a body that demands too much from it. You walk to the hedgerow in late autumn when the hawthorn berries have ripened a deep red, almost burgundy, and hang in heavy clusters that the birds haven't yet stripped completely. Hawthorn is older women's medicine, the remedy you never needed in youth but becomes essential as the heart muscle weakens and the cardiovascular system loses its youthful resilience. The berries are small, each containing a large seed relative to the amount of flesh, and they taste mealy and slightly sweet with an astringent quality that dries your mouth. You gather them by the handful, filling your basket with these tiny red promises of continued function, of hearts kept beating despite their inclination to fail. The mainstream historical fact supporting your harvest is well documented. Hawthorn has been used as heart medicine since ancient times, with Greek and Roman physicians prescribing it for cardiac conditions, and medieval herbalists continuing the tradition. The plant's thorny branches made it symbolically powerful. Hawthorn was believed to protect against evil and mark sacred boundaries, but its medicinal reputation came from observable effects on people suffering heart troubles. But here's the quirky detail that makes you smile despite your worry. Medieval folk believed hawthorn flowering out of season-predicted disaster, and that Christ's crown of thorns was woven from hawthorn branches, making the plant simultaneously blessed and cursed. Historians still argue whether hawthorn contains compounds that genuinely support cardiac function, or whether its reputation persists through wishful thinking and confirmation bias. The preparation of hawthorn berries requires patience because their medicinal compounds don't yield easily to simple steeping. You simmer the berries for at least 30 minutes, crushing them occasionally with a wooden spoon to break open the flesh and release what's inside. The resulting liquid is reddish-brown, slightly thick from the berry solids, and the taste is mild fruity but astringent, pleasant enough that you don't need to add honey, though you sometimes do anyway. Modern science would eventually identify flavonoids and oligomeric proanthocyanidins as hawthorn's active cardiac compounds, but you simply know that older women who drink hawthorn tea regularly seem to live longer and suffer less from heart troubles than those who don't. Do you remember when your heart felt strong and reliable? When you could work all day without your chest tightening or your breath becoming laboured? When you fell asleep without worrying whether you'd wake in the morning? That security is gone now, replaced by constant awareness that your heart might fail at any moment. And hawthorn tea is your attempt to extend the time before that failure becomes inevitable. You're not naive enough to believe the berries will cure you. Hearts that begin failing rarely recover completely, but you hope they'll slow the decline, buy you more years with your children, give you time to teach your daughters everything they'll need to survive without you. Your mother's heart failed suddenly one spring morning when she was 46, just collapsed while drawing water from the well, and she was dead before anyone could reach her. You remember the awful stillness of her body, the way her face looked almost peaceful despite the violence of her heart simply stopping, and you've carried that image with you as a warning of your own likely future. But your mother didn't have hawthorn, didn't know about cardiac tonics, or didn't have access to them, and you're determined not to follow her path without exhausting every possible intervention. The village wise woman Agnes has used hawthorn for decades, claims it's what's kept her alive past 70 when most women are long dead. And while you're sceptical that any single remedy deserves that much credit, you can't deny that Agnes's heart seems remarkably strong for someone her age. She makes hawthorn preparations year-round, using dried berries in winter, fresh flowers in spring, and both leaves and berries in a complex tincture she steeps in strong spirits when she can obtain them. You can't afford Agnes's elaborate preparations, so you stick with simple berry tea, drunk twice daily, and hope that consistency compensates for simplicity. The first cup of the morning goes down easily, the mild berry flavour inoffensive enough to consume without resistance, and you try to believe you can feel it working, imagining the compounds travelling through your bloodstream, strengthening vessel walls, steadying irregular rhythms, easing the strain on muscle tissue that's been working without rest for 4 decades. You probably can't actually feel these effects, but the belief itself might help, might reduce the anxiety that makes heart problems worse, might give you the mental peace that allows your cardiovascular system to function marginally better. Your husband knows you're making hawthorn tea but doesn't understand why, doesn't recognise the seriousness of your condition because you've hidden most symptoms from him. Men worry uselessly about things they can't fix, and telling him your heart is failing would only burden him with knowledge he can't act on. So you suffer quietly, drink your tea consistently, and hope you're buying enough time to see your youngest daughter married and your grandchildren born. These are modest goals, achievable if your heart cooperates for just a few more years, and hawthorn is your ally in reaching them. The berries you've gathered will last through winter if you're careful with portions, and you'll supplement them with dried hawthorn flowers you harvested last spring, the delicate white blossoms that cover the thorny branches before berries form. The flowers work differently than berries, also Agnes claims, with flowers affecting rhythm and berries affecting strength, and using both provides comprehensive cardiac support. You're not sure if this distinction has merit or if it's folk medicine inventing specificity where none exists, but you use both anyway because doing something feels better than passive waiting for failure. The second cup of hawthorn tea comes at evening, after work is finished and you can sit quietly without children demanding attention or tasks requiring completion. This is when you notice your symptoms most clearly: the tightness in your chest, the slight irregularity of your pulse, the fatigue that feels different from normal tiredness. You drink slowly, monitoring your body's response, and within an hour the tightness eases slightly, the pulse steadies marginally, and you feel fractionally better. These improvements are subtle enough that you might be imagining them, but they're also consistent enough that you trust them as real. Your daughter, now approaching marriageable age, needs to learn about hawthorn even though she's too young to need it personally. Heart troubles often run in families, and if you inherited weakness from your mother, your daughter might inherit it from you. So you teach her to identify hawthorn trees in all seasons, the distinctive lobed leaves, the wicked thorns, the white flowers, the red berries, and you show her how to harvest and prepare them properly. This might be the most important medicine knowledge you pass down, because it might literally keep her alive decades from now, when her own heart begins showing strain. The hawthorn trees growing throughout your landscape represent a kind of distributed cardiac ward. Natural medicine freely available to anyone who knows what they're looking at and how to use it. The same thorny hedgerows that mark property boundaries and keep livestock contained also provide heart medicine for aging women, a dual purpose that makes the trees even more valuable. You've marked the specific trees that produce the best berries, the ones with the deepest colour and fullest clusters, and you return to these trees year after year, grateful for their reliable production. By the time you finish your evening cup, the tightness in your chest has eased enough that you can contemplate sleep without anxiety about waking with your heart pounding irregularly. The hawthorn won't cure your condition. You understand that cardiac decline is ultimately irreversible, but it makes the decline gradual rather than precipitous, manageable rather than immediately threatening. You're buying time with these red berries, purchasing additional heartbeats. And while you don't know exactly how many more you'll get, it's more than you'd have without the medicine. The berries stored in your cupboard represent hope measured in small increments, another month of function, another season of life, another year with your family. You'll drink your hawthorn tea faithfully, twice daily without fail, and you'll trust that somewhere in these berries are compounds that strengthen what's weakening, steady what's becoming irregular, and extend what's approaching its end. That's all you can do, and maybe, if you're fortunate, it will be enough. Your belly has grown round with your 6th pregnancy, and the midwife has been preparing you for what's coming with a seriousness that suggests this birth might be more difficult than the previous ones. You're older now, your body less resilient than it was with the first few children, and the aches in your hips and back suggest that carrying this baby to term will test every limit you possess. But more concerning than the immediate discomfort is the birth itself, the dangerous hours when women die from hemorrhaging, exhaustion, or complications that no amount of preparation can prevent. You've attended enough births to know that survival isn't guaranteed, and you've started drinking the tea that generations of women swear makes labour shorter, bleeding less severe, and recovery faster. Raspberry leaf tea has become your daily ritual, consumed in quantities that would seem excessive if you didn't understand its purpose. The leaves come from the wild raspberry canes growing along the forest edge, gathered in midsummer when they're at their greenest and most vital, and dried carefully to preserve compounds that supposedly tone the uterus and prepare it for the violent work of expelling a baby. The taste is mild, slightly fruity and astringent, pleasant enough that you can drink cup after cup without resistance. And you've been consuming it religiously since you felt the first quickening movements that confirm this pregnancy would continue. The mainstream historical fact underlying your daily consumption is well-documented. Raspberry leaf appears in medieval herbals as preparation for childbirth, recommended by midwives and wise women throughout Europe. And the practice extends back even further to ancient Greek medicine. The plant was considered sacred to fertility goddesses in pre-Christian times. And that association persisted into medieval culture where raspberry leaves were standard equipment for managing pregnancy and birth. But here's the quirky detail: medieval folk believed that if a pregnant woman walked through a raspberry patch, the baby would be born with a strawberry-shaped birthmark. And some claimed raspberry leaf tea could determine a baby's sex based on whether their mother craved sweet or bitter beverages. Historians still argue whether raspberry leaf actually affects uterine muscle tone, or whether its reputation persists through tradition rather than measurable efficacy. You steep a large handful of the dried leaves each morning, creating a brew strong enough to be almost medicinal in intensity, and you drink it lukewarm throughout the day, refilling your cup whenever it empties. The midwife says you should consume at least 4 cups daily in these final weeks, building up the uterine strength that will make labour more efficient and less dangerous. You trust her expertise because she's attended dozens of births and has seen firsthand which women labour easily and which struggle for days, and she swears that consistent raspberry leaf consumption correlates with easier births. Do you remember your first labour? The shocking intensity of contractions that seemed designed to tear you apart? The hours of pushing that left you so exhausted you could barely stay conscious? The blood that seemed to flow endlessly afterward? Each subsequent birth has been slightly different, but equally brutal, and you're hoping desperately that raspberry leaf tea will make this final one, and you've decided this will be the final one, marginally less terrible. You're not expecting miracles, just hoping for a labour measured in hours rather than days, and bleeding that stops on its own rather than requiring desperate interventions. Your mother died in childbirth with what would have been her 8th baby, bleeding out despite the midwife's best efforts, and you've carried that fear through every pregnancy since your first. The odds aren't in your favour. Maternal mortality is simply a fact of being a woman of childbearing age, but raspberry leaf tea is one of the few things you can do proactively to improve those odds. It might not work, might offer nothing but false comfort, but doing nothing feels like surrendering to fate, and you're not ready to surrender while options remain. The village wise woman, Agnes, grows raspberry canes specifically for medicinal leaf harvest, pruning them to encourage maximum leaf production rather than fruit, and she supplies most of the pregnant women in the area with dried leaves. She charges reasonable prices, understanding that pregnant women often have limited resources, and she includes detailed instructions about steeping time, quantity, and frequency. Agnes herself had 8 children and attributes her survival to consistent raspberry leaf consumption. Though you suspect luck played as large a role as any herb, your older daughters watch you drink cup after cup of the pale tea, and you explain that this is preparation for the work their bodies will eventually do, teaching them early that childbirth requires planning and proactive measures rather than passive hope. They're too young to fully understand the dangers, still think of babies as arriving magically rather than through violent physical processes that frequently kill mothers, and you're content to let them maintain that innocence for now. Soon enough they'll learn the truth, will attend births themselves and see the blood and terror, and then they'll understand why you drink this endless tea with such dedication. The raspberry leaf is supposed to work cumulatively, building effects over weeks and months rather than providing immediate results. So you started drinking it early in this pregnancy and have continued without interruption. The theory, as the midwife explains it, is that regular consumption tones the uterine muscle, making it contract more effectively during labour and clamp down more efficiently afterward to prevent hemorrhaging. Whether this theory has merit or represents wishful thinking translated into tradition, you can't know until you're actually in labour, and by then it will be too late to change strategies. The 3rd cup of the day goes down while you're preparing the evening meal, your free hand pressed against your aching lower back, and you wonder how many more weeks this pregnancy will continue. The baby is active, kicking and shifting constantly, which the midwife says indicates good health, and you're grateful for that even as you resent the discomfort. Your body is exhausted from the work of building another human, depleted of nutrients and energy, and you're drinking nettle tea alongside the raspberry leaf to address the anemia that pregnancy always brings. The other pregnant women in your village all drink raspberry leaf tea. It's simply what you do when preparing for birth, and you compare notes about quantities and timing, about whether it seems to be working, about fears and hopes for the approaching ordeal. These conversations create a kind of solidarity among women who share the same dangerous fate, who understand that any of them might die in the coming months, and who support each other through shared knowledge and mutual encouragement. The raspberry leaf tea is almost secondary to this community of preparation. Though the tea itself provides tangible focus for abstract fears, your husband avoids discussing the birth, uncomfortable with topics that remind him of his helplessness in situations only women can manage. And you don't push him to engage because his worry would be useless anyway. Men pace outside while women do the actual work of bringing new life into the world. And that division suits you fine. You don't want him seeing you at your most vulnerable. Don't want his fear adding to your own. The raspberry leaf tea is your private preparation, your secret weapon against the dangers you'll face alone, with only the midwife and female neighbours for support. The fourth cup of the day comes at evening when you're finally able to rest. Feet elevated to reduce the swelling that makes your ankles disappear into puffy flesh, and you drink it slowly while trying to memorize your other children's faces as they are now. This might be your last pregnancy, but it might also be your last everything if the birth goes badly. And you want to carry their images with you into whatever comes next. The raspberry leaf tea tastes ordinary, unremarkable, and it seems impossible that something so mild could affect something as profound as childbirth. But you drink it anyway because hope is precious and herbs are cheap. The raspberry leaves stored in your cupboard represent women's collective wisdom about managing the most dangerous thing female bodies do. Knowledge accumulated through generations of observation and experiment, through noting what seemed to help and what didn't. This knowledge has never been written in medical texts, has never been validated by male physicians, exists purely in the oral tradition passed from midwife to mother to daughter. You trust it because you have nothing else to trust, because the alternative is facing birth with no preparation except prayer. And while you'll pray too, you prefer combining divine intervention with herbal intervention. By the time you finish your evening cup, your baby is settling into sleep, the violent kicks subsiding into gentle rolls and shifts, and you place your hand on your belly feeling the solid mass of a nearly fully formed human. In a few weeks you'll meet this person. We'll hold them and nurse them and begin the long process of raising them, and that meeting will happen through a process of pain and blood and risk that raspberry leaf tea might make marginally safer. That's all you're asking, not safety, which doesn't exist, but marginal improvement of terrible odds. And these leaves might deliver exactly that. The cough that settles in your chest during February is the deep, rattling kind that shakes your whole body and leaves you gasping for breath between spasms. It started as a tickle in your throat 3 days ago, progressed to a dry hack by yesterday, and now it's a full chest congestion that keeps you awake at night and makes every breath feel laboured and incomplete. Your youngest child has the same cough, and you can hear her struggling in the next room, her small body racked with spasms that sound painful and dangerous. This is the season when lung congestion kills people, when simple coughs turn into infections that fill the lungs with fluid until breathing becomes impossible. And you need the remedy that has saved countless lives by clearing airways and fighting the demons that medieval folk believe cause respiratory illness. You bundle yourself against the cold and walk to the hillside where wild thyme grows in patches among the rocks, low-growing plants with tiny leaves that release their distinctive scent when crushed. Thyme is dormant now, brown and seemingly lifeless, but the dried stems still contain the volatile oils that make it medicine, and you gather armfuls of the woody stalks, stripping leaves and soft stem sections into your basket. The scent that rises from your harvest is sharp and clean, almost medicinal even before you've brewed it, and breathing it deeply seems to clear your congested sinuses slightly, giving you hope that the tea will work even better. The mainstream historical fact supporting your desperate harvest is well-documented thyme was a primary respiratory remedy throughout medieval Europe, prescribed for coughs, congestion, and what physicians called putrid lung conditions. Monasteries cultivated thyme extensively both for medicine and as a preservative, and its name derives from the Greek word for courage, not because it provided bravery, but because the pungent smoke of burning thyme was thought to drive away plague and pestilence. But here's the quirky detail: medieval folk believed thyme enabled people to see fairies if worn or consumed at specific times, and that it grew only in places where fairy folk had danced. Historians still argue whether thyme's reputation as a respiratory medicine came from genuine antimicrobial properties, or whether any strong-smelling herb would have been credited with similar powers in an era when bad odours were thought to cause disease. Back in your kitchen, you stuff a generous handful of thyme into your brewing pot, more than you'd use for ordinary teas, because chest congestion requires aggressive treatment. You pour boiling water over the dried herb and immediately cover the pot to trap the volatile oils that would otherwise escape with the steam. These oils are the medicine, and losing them to evaporation wastes the remedy's potency. The scent that escapes despite your precautions is intensely herbal, sharp and almost eucalyptus-like, and just smelling it makes you cough more violently as your lungs attempt to expel whatever's congesting them. The tea needs to steep for at least 15 minutes to extract the compounds that fight infection and loosen phlegm, and while you wait, you drape a cloth over your head and lean over the pot, inhaling the medicated steam directly. This is double treatment: the aromatic vapours entering your lungs through breathing, and the liquid medicine that you'll soon consume entering through digestion. And you've learned that combining inhalation with consumption produces better results than either method alone. The steam makes you cough more forcefully, bringing up thick greenish phlegm that you spit into the fire. And while this is disgusting, it's also encouraging because expectorating the congestion is exactly what needs to happen. Do you remember what it felt like to breathe easily? To draw deep breaths without coughing or feeling pressure in your chest? To sleep through the night without waking to hack and gasp? That ease seems impossible now when every breath is an effort and your chest feels filled with heavy fluid. But thyme tea promises to restore that ease if you're patient and consistent with treatment. The tea won't work instantly. Chest congestion takes days to clear even with aggressive intervention, but it will work if you drink enough of it, frequently enough, while also using steam and rest and all the other strategies that support respiratory healing. Your mother used thyme for every respiratory illness that struck the household, and you remember the distinctive smell filling your childhood home during winter months. Remember sitting with your head under a cloth breathing medicated steam while she stood guard with more hot water. She called thyme lung cleanser and claimed it could cure anything short of consumption, which in her framework meant tuberculosis rather than ordinary chest infections. You don't know if she was right about thyme's curative range, but you know it helps because you've used it successfully for every respiratory illness you've experienced since learning to prepare it yourself. The village wise woman Agnes makes thyme syrup by simmering fresh thyme with honey for hours, creating a thick preparation that supposedly works faster than tea. But honey is expensive and you don't have hours to spare for elaborate preparations when you're struggling to breathe. So you stick with simple tea, drunk as hot as you can tolerate, and you brew pot after pot throughout the day, maintaining constant levels of the antiseptic compounds in your system. Agnes also burns dried thyme as fumigation, filling sick rooms with smoke meant to kill infection-causing demons. And while you're skeptical about demons, you appreciate that the aromatic smoke does seem to make breathing easier temporarily. Your daughter drinks the thyme tea reluctantly, making faces at the strong herbal taste. But she drinks it because she's learned that medicine doesn't have to taste good to work. And because her cough is frightening enough that she'll try anything for relief, you've sweetened her portion with a bit of precious honey, making it marginally more palatable. And you've shown her how to inhale the steam properly, how to breathe deeply despite the coughing it triggers, how to understand that sometimes healing requires temporary worsening before improvement comes. The second pot of tea goes down more easily now that your taste buds have adjusted to the strong herbal flavour, and you're starting to feel subtle effects. The pressure in your chest seems slightly lighter. The cough is becoming more productive rather than dry and painful, and you're expectorating more phlegm. These are good signs, indicators that the congestion is loosening rather than settling deeper into your lungs, and you increase your consumption to 6 or 7 cups throughout the day, constantly maintaining therapeutic levels. The thyme growing wild on your hillside represents free medicine available to anyone knowledgeable enough to recognize and harvest it. And you're grateful that such a powerful respiratory remedy grows abundantly rather than requiring cultivation or purchase. Some plants demand careful tending. Sage needs good drainage. Lavender hates wet feet, but thyme thrives on neglect, growing in poor rocky soil where nothing else survives. This hardiness makes it appropriate medicine for tough conditions, for winter illnesses that kill weaker people, for the respiratory challenges that test survival itself. By evening, your daughter's cough has loosened noticeably. Her breathing sounds less laboured, and she's sleeping in longer stretches between coughing fits. Your own chest still feels heavy, but the painful tightness has eased, and you're expectorating enough phlegm that you trust your lungs are clearing rather than filling further. The thyme tea has done what you needed it to do. It's turned a potentially dangerous chest infection into a manageable illness that will resolve with continued treatment rather than escalating into the deadly lung conditions that claim lives every winter. The third pot of the day brews while you prepare a simple evening meal, and you've started adding thyme to the soup as well, figuring that consuming the herb in multiple forms can only help. The soup tastes strongly herbal, almost medicinal, but your family eats it without complaint because they understand that winter illnesses require aggressive treatment with whatever remedies are available. Your husband, who hasn't developed the cough yet, drinks preventive thyme tea anyway, understanding that avoiding illness is easier than treating it once established. The antiseptic properties that make thyme effective against respiratory infections also make it useful for preserving food, and you've used it throughout the year in cooking not just for flavour, but for its ability to prevent spoilage in meat and other perishables. This dual purpose, both medicine and preservative, makes thyme one of your most valuable herbs, essential to both health and food security. The bundles hanging from your rafters represent protection against multiple threats, respiratory and digestive, and you maintain generous stores because running out of thyme during winter could literally mean the difference between survival and death. By the time you finish your evening cup and settle for sleep, your breathing is noticeably easier, the cough less frequent though still present, and you feel confident that you've caught this infection early enough to prevent it becoming serious. Your daughter coughs occasionally from the next room, but the desperate quality has left her coughing, replaced by the productive sound of lungs clearing themselves successfully. The thyme tea has brought you both through another respiratory challenge, has delivered you from the demons that inhabit congested lungs, and tomorrow you'll continue the treatment until both of you are breathing clearly again and the threat has completely passed. The sleeplessness has become unbearable, stretching through weeks where you lie awake for hours each night, your mind refusing to quiet even when your body is exhausted beyond measure. You've tried everything else: chamomile for gentle calming, lavender for anxiety, even small amounts of ale that just made you dizzy without producing sleep, and nothing has worked. The insomnia is destroying you slowly, making days feel impossible to navigate and nights feel like punishment. And you've reached the point where you need the strongest remedy available, the one you've been avoiding because of its reputation and its smell but can no longer refuse. Valerian root is your last resort, the sleep medicine that works when nothing else will, and you've been putting off using it because the root smells like rotting cheese mixed with dirty socks and old sweat. The odour is so offensive that some people can't force themselves to consume it despite desperate need for sleep. But you're beyond caring about unpleasant smells when the alternative is another night of staring at darkness while your thoughts circle endlessly through worries and fears. You dig the roots in autumn when the plant has finished flowering, extracting thick, pale rhizomes from soil and trying not to gag at the smell they release when broken or cut. The mainstream historical fact underlying your desperate remedy is well documented. Valerian has been used as a sleep aid since ancient Greek and Roman times, with medieval physicians prescribing it for insomnia and nervous disorders. And its Latin name Valeriana comes from the verb valere, meaning to be strong or healthy. Medieval herbalists called it all heal and used it for everything from epilepsy to plague. Though its primary reputation was always as a powerful sedative. But here's the quirky detail that makes you wonder about your ancestors' desperation, despite smelling absolutely revolting to humans. Valerian attracts cats who become intoxicated by the scent, rolling in it and acting drunk, leading to medieval theories that the plant contained spirits that affected different creatures differently. Historians still argue whether valerian produces genuine sedative effects through chemical action, or whether the exhaustion of forcing down something so foul-smelling simply makes people too tired to stay awake. You slice the dried root into small pieces, trying to breathe through your mouth to avoid the full impact of the smell, and you drop them into your brewing pot with grim determination. The water you add should be hot but not boiling. Excessive heat makes valerian even more bitter and foul, and you steep it for at least 20 minutes, creating a brew that looks innocent, pale tan and unremarkable, but smells like a medieval torture designed specifically for people who need sleep. The first time you tried valerian, years ago during a previous bout of insomnia, you nearly vomited from the smell alone. But you've learned to dissociate the odour from the liquid, to drink quickly without breathing, to chase it immediately with something pleasant. The taste is somehow worse than the smell, which seems impossible but is nevertheless true, intensely bitter, with a musty quality that lingers on your tongue long after you've swallowed, and an aftertaste that makes you want to scrape your tongue with your teeth. You've learned to hold your nose while drinking, to gulp rather than sip, and to immediately eat a bit of honey or chew a mint leaf to mask the lingering flavour. Your face contorts involuntarily. Your throat wants to reject what you're forcing into it, and you understand completely why valerian isn't anyone's first choice for sleep medicine. But it works. It works when nothing else does, and that effectiveness justifies the temporary suffering. Do you remember what it felt like to fall asleep naturally? To lie down tired and simply drift away without hours of wakeful agony first? To sleep deeply through the night without waking repeatedly in anxiety? That's what you're seeking as you choke down this foul-tasting tea. That surrender into unconsciousness that your body has forgotten how to achieve on its own. The insomnia has been caused by too many worries, your failing health, your children's futures, the constant struggle to survive, and your mind has lost the ability to turn itself off, trapped in circular thinking that prevents rest even when exhaustion should make sleep inevitable. Within 30 minutes of drinking valerian tea, you begin to feel the effects: a heaviness in your limbs, a softening of your thoughts, a pleasant distance developing between you and your anxieties. The worries don't disappear, but they become less urgent, less immediate, as though they're happening to someone else or in some other time. Your eyelids grow heavy, your breathing slows and deepens, and you feel yourself being pulled gently toward unconsciousness in a way that feels almost irresistible. This is what you've been desperate for, this chemical override of your broken sleep mechanism, this forced surrender into the rest your body desperately needs. The village wise woman Agnes uses valerian extensively for people suffering severe insomnia or nervous disorders, and she's developed techniques for making it slightly less revolting, adding strong herbs like peppermint or brewing it with sweet wine instead of water. But even her preparations can't completely mask valerian's fundamental nastiness. She charges premium prices for valerian remedies because gathering and preparing the root is unpleasant work that most people avoid, and because people experiencing desperate insomnia will pay whatever she asks for relief. You've bought her preparations occasionally when your own stores ran low, and you found them marginally more palatable than your homemade versions, but not significantly more effective. Your daughter watches you drink valerian tea with horrified fascination, having been warned repeatedly never to use it unless absolutely necessary. And you explain that some medicines are so powerful they should be reserved for true emergencies. She asks why you don't use it every night if it works so well, and you tell her that valerian loses effectiveness with regular use, that bodies adjust to it and require increasingly large doses, and that the goal is always to use the minimum intervention necessary. Tonight qualifies as emergency. You've been awake until dawn for 5 nights running, but tomorrow you'll try returning to gentler remedies before resorting to valerian again. The sleep that valerian brings is different from natural sleep, heavier and more profound, with fewer dreams, or at least fewer remembered dreams, and waking from it feels like climbing up from deep water. You sleep through the entire night for the first time in weeks, your body finally getting the rest it's been craving, and you wake feeling groggy but fundamentally better, as though someone has reset something broken inside you. The grogginess fades within an hour, leaving behind genuine refreshment, proof that sleep, even chemically induced sleep, serves essential restorative functions that can't be obtained any other way. Your mother never used valerian, suffered through her insomnia with nothing but prayer and resignation, and you remember hearing her moving through the cottage at night, unable to rest, slowly being destroyed by sleeplessness. You've wondered whether chronic insomnia contributed to her early death, whether the cumulative effects of sleep deprivation weakened her enough that she couldn't survive challenges that well-rested women might have weathered. Your determination to treat your own insomnia aggressively comes partly from watching her decline, from refusing to accept that suffering is inevitable when remedies exist. The valerian roots stored in your cupboard represent emergency relief, the remedy you hope not to need but keep available for nights when gentler options have failed. You don't want to become dependent on valerian, don't want to reach the point where you can't sleep without it, so you use it sparingly, as a reset button rather than a daily requirement. The revolting taste and smell serve as natural deterrents against overuse. You're unlikely to take valerian casually when consuming it requires genuine determination, and this might be one case where unpleasantness serves a protective function. The second night after using valerian, you try returning to chamomile and lavender, hoping that one night of deep sleep has reset your nervous system enough that gentler remedies will work again. They do, Mostly you sleep better than you have in weeks, though not as profoundly as the Valerian night, and you feel relieved that you haven't developed immediate dependence. The goal is always to use the minimum effective intervention, escalating only when necessary and de-escalating as soon as possible. And Valerian represents the top of your escalation ladder, the final option before complete surrender to sleeplessness. The reputation of Valerian as powerful medicine is well deserved, and you treat it with the respect that powerful things require careful storage, sparing use, and acknowledgement that effectiveness comes with risks. Medieval physicians knew that valerian could cause morning grogginess if used too late or in excessive quantities, and that some people experienced paradoxical effects where it made them more anxious rather than less. You've never experienced these problems, but you remain cautious, monitoring your response and adjusting doses carefully, understanding that your body's chemistry might change and what works now might not work forever. As you wrap the remaining valerian root and return it to storage, you feel grateful for its existence even while hoping not to need it again soon. The foul smell and worse taste are prices worth paying for the gift of sleep when sleep has become impossible through any other means, and having it available provides psychological comfort even on nights when you don't use it. Knowing that relief exists makes enduring temporary insomnia easier. The root itself looks innocent, pale and unremarkable, giving no indication of its powerful effects or its revolting characteristics. And this deceptiveness seems appropriate for medicine that works through surrender, through forcing the brain to stop fighting and accept the unconsciousness it needs but can't achieve voluntarily. And so the seasons turn, and you continue your quiet work with herbs and roots and flowers, maintaining the knowledge that keeps you and your family alive in a world that offers few guarantees and fewer comforts. The bundles hanging from your rafters, the jars lined on your shelves, the plants growing in your garden, these are your inheritance and your legacy. The accumulated wisdom of countless women whose names history never recorded, but whose knowledge persists in every cup of tea you brew. Tonight, as darkness settles soft around your cottage and the fire burns low, you prepare one final cup of chamomile, that gentle friend you started with so many remedies ago. The steam rises carrying its apple-sweet scent, and you wrap your hands around the warm cup, feeling the day's tensions begin to release. Your children sleep peacefully in the next room. Your stores are adequate for the season ahead, and your body, despite its various complaints and failings, continues functioning well enough to carry you through another day. The teas you've brewed today, some for healing, some for comfort, some for simple survival, represent an unbroken chain of care extending backward through time and forward into futures you'll never see. Your daughters will learn these recipes, will pass them to their own daughters, and the knowledge will persist even when your name has been forgotten, even when no one remembers that you once stood in this kitchen brewing healing into hot water and hope. Sleep comes easily tonight, pulled down by chamomile's gentle insistence and the deep satisfaction of having survived another day through knowledge, determination, and the generous medicine of plants that ask nothing but attention and gratitude in return. Your breathing slows, your thoughts soften and blur, and you drift away into darkness that feels safe rather than threatening, restful rather than fearful, knowing that tomorrow will bring its own challenges and its own remedies, and that you'll face them with the same quiet competence that has carried you this far. Sweet dreams, traveller. May your own remedies be always at hand, and may you sleep as peacefully as the medieval women whose wisdom you've carried with you through this long, gentle night.